Ready for coming? I'd like to call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Riverton Airport Board. Today's March 21st, 2014. Looks like we have a roll call and a quorum to do business this morning. First item of business is to consider the adoption or make changes to the agenda. Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, what we'd like to do is on action item number 7, if we can move that down to number 9 and move number 9 up with YDOT in place of number 7.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the agenda as modified.
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion and second to amend the agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Certainly. Testing. Great. Okay. All right. The approval of the minutes for the January 24, 2014 meeting. Everyone's had a chance to look at that?
Second.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes for the January 24, 2014 seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Start this morning with our round table and the Mayor Warpness. I don't see him, but oh, there you are. You're hiding behind that
I'm
microphone.
hiding in a different place.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Pronto and members of the Riverton Board, members of the public. Thank you for coming this early morning. We've got a good turnout this morning. I didn't anticipate this many people here, but it is an important issue, and really appreciate your coming this morning. I'm not a public speaker, so I prepared some written notes. I've got copies of them, of these notes, that I'll pass out so that people can know what I'm thinking. But I prepared this paper to help clarify my intention regarding the relationship between the Airport Board and the Joint Powers Task Force and the 5-member ad hoc committee. On December 17th, Mr. Nick Wangler gave a rather dismal presentation on the state of aviation in the country. His presentation wasn't dismal, it was dismal content. Nick did an excellent job at that presentation, so we thank him for that. In that meeting, Commissioner Allen suggested a task force be created to see how best to deal with this problem. On February 13th, an outline for the creation of such a task force was sent to stakeholders in the county with a letter describing the need for such a group. And it's attached, the letter and the outline. The date of March 14th was put in the letter for the time to get a representative named. This was 1 week before this regular airport board meeting. On March 4th, it was brought to my attention that it was urgent that the city needs to move to get our name in the hat regarding potential state funding assistance. I spoke with Senator Bebout on the 6th or 7th, and he confirmed that we needed to move as fast as we could on this funding. On March 12th, the meeting was called by Mr. Mastis at Riverton City Hall. In that meeting, the feeling of those attending was to move forward with a small group to make sure that we got our hat in the ring for this funding. The ad hoc committee of 5 was put together at that time. The 5-member ad hoc committee that was created at the recent meeting in City Hall 3/12/14, in my mind, was not meant to replace the initial and broad-based task force. Its main urgent function was to nail down the state airport enhancement funding and to assure that Riverton, Fremont County get its name in the hat for that possible state monies. At that time, there was a real feeling of urgency to move on that matter as quickly as we could. And when I contacted Senator Bebout, he confirmed that I asked him when we should get that in place, and he said yesterday. And so to me, that read as pretty urgent. Inasmuch as 3 members of the 5 members on the ad hoc committee, Stephen Weaver, Stephanie Kessler, and Cade Mastis, are already on the task force, I would like to suggest that the other 2 members, Phil Christopherson and Missy White, be added to the task force. This will make for a fairly large membership, but in the interest of allowing all stakeholders to be represented, I feel that it is best. I also feel that over time, some of the membership will choose not to participate, and so the task force board will become more manageable. This will allow the 5-member ad hoc committee to be merged with the task force having completed their urgent and time-sensitive initial duties. Mr. Weaver and I have been having some discussion about that, and he felt that it was a little bit confusing. But my intention was not to do away with the task force as we had originally wanted to create it, but to just move the 5 members into that task force and then let them move forward. The task force will recommend to the Riverton Airport Board the direction that they feel is the best long-term course of action for the City of Riverton and the county at large to take. The existing airport board will then recommend to the Riverton City Council for formal and legal action necessary to gain the best and most reliable air service for Riverton and Fremont County. The way that I have the Riverton Regional Airport Task Force members, they would be Paul Griffin as manager, Stephen Weaver as city administrator. They would be co-chairman of that task force. And whenever an organization like this is formed, usually at the initial meeting, if there's a feeling that someone else wants to be chairman or you want to redefine the roles, then I would have no problem with that. Dean Peranto would be a member of it. He is the chairman of the Riverton Airport Board. I think that's reasonable. Rich Gard will be our city council member representative. Commissioner Kessler will be representing the commissioners. Mr. Mastis will represent the Lander City Council. David Bennett will represent Du Bois City Council. Gary Hamlin, the Pavilion Mayor, will represent Pavilion. Ken Kundal will represent Shoshone as a councilman. I have not heard back from Hudson, the Arapaho tribe, or the Shoshone tribe at this time. And then by expanding it out to Phil Christofferson of ID Incorporated and Missy White with Leeds, that will make up the entire task force. So that's the way that I envision our moving forward. By doing that, we'll be able to represent the entire county, and the 5-member task force, it's my understanding, have been moving forward to get the application and everything for the state funding that's necessary. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, Chairman Pronto, or however you want to handle it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think at this point we'll move to our roundtable and visitors and delegations. There are a lot of people here today, and I'm sure people would like to make a statement. If you would, we'll call on you individually. If you'd like to stand, give your name, and keep it to about 1 or 2 minutes. We are going to cover a lot of material today. We want to make sure that we keep things moving. Would anybody like to address the board? Well, that's easy. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say that
Come up to the microphone if you can.
we're looking at
If you could use the microphone up here, sir, that would be great.
I was just going to say, it kind of occurs to me that we're kind of coming down on Great Lakes and saying that they're the problem. I think from my point of view, it's a little bit different. It's more industry-wide than just Great Lakes. And if we dumped Great Lakes, we probably wouldn't gain a whole lot. I don't have a commercial license, and I have no interest in flying for commercial, but I fly on my little airplane off my back pasture. I can tell you right now, the problem really stems from changes that the U.S. Congress passed when they required 1,500 hours for right seat pilots. If you're an 18-year-old kid and you decide you want a career in aviation, you want to be a commercial pilot, you get your private pilot's license. You get the first 100 hours, you're just learning something new every day. You have no business in the right seat of a commercial airliner. The FAA recognizes by the time you get to 250 hours, you're beginning to get the hang of it, and you probably shouldn't be alone, but you can sit in the right seat and have an experienced captain right next to you. But the problem is you're looking at $250 an hour for dual instruction and well over $100 an hour for just flying to get your time up. So just to get to the 250 hours to be a commercial pilot, which used to be the standard to be in the right seat, you're looking at $25,000, $30,000 to get to that point. So now you got an 18-year-old kid who's working whatever job to pay for his aviation because no one else is going to pay for that first 250 hours. And that was the standard. Then you'd go to work for Great Lakes or somebody like Great Lakes, and you'd sit in the right seat and you'd get your time up, and you'd either advance in Great Lakes or you'd move on to another airline. Now we've got a burden of, or a hurdle of 1,500 hours. Now we're talking $120,000 to $150,000 that this 18-year-old kid's going to have to bear before he can go to work for Great Lakes. And the problem has been the industry standard. These are businesses, supply and demand. You got a bunch of 20-year-old kids who work for 5 years to get their 250 hours. They've got their 250 hours. They got their commercial license. So they go to work for Great Lakes and they sit in that right seat. And they're willing to work for less than most people would consider a living wage. That's the way it was. Just to get their time up, they'll sit in that right seat for a low wage. Now, you got to come up with $220,000 to $150,000 to sit in that right seat. And Great Lakes is not the problem. The industry has paid low wages. Now they've got a big hurdle. So how many people are going to spend that much money to get a low-paid job? That's really where the problem is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's true. It's not just the change to the mandatory hours for all pilots that sit as a crew member. There's also a time limit as well. It's called a duty cycle, which is 30 hours a week, 100 hours a month, and 1,000 hours a year. So by default, the industry demand requires a 20% increase in pilots just to cover the existing loads and routes that they fly. So we've kind of cut it off at the knees, and you're right, there is a void in that, which makes it difficult for people to enter into the aviation field. And as far as the living wage goes, the ability to sit in the right seat and get time was part of your wage. That's what got you to that 2,500 hours. Would anybody else like to make a comment? Yes, ma'am. If you could state your name as well, please.
I'm Heather Becker. I worked for General Electric for 6 years. I now work for an independent consulting firm based out of St. Paul. I travel all over North America. I've flown over 70 segments in the last 5 years per year. So a lot of flight time on Great Lakes. So whereas I understand that the flight issue, the new the FAA ruling is a concern, Great Lakes is still a fundamental concern. And the reason why I say that is because I've flown on multiple airlines across the country. And fundamentally, they have some significant challenges. Not just the pilots, but the aircrafts themselves. I mean, we have asked, and their own staff here has asked, can you just give us flights that are going to be consistent? You know what? Okay, we understand you have pilot issues. Then give us 2 flights a day that you're going to fly, that we know can take off, because it's more maddening as a business person to get up there at 6 in the morning and your flight's not going to take off till noon if you can even get on that one. And when you have meetings scheduled for that afternoon, well, then we're delayed. I can't fly out of Riverton anymore. My company will not allow me to fly out of Riverton. I have to go to Casper for reliable air service. I have been on flights that have been over Boyson that have turned around and gone back because of mechanical issues. I have been delayed on flights because the crew they haven't had rest time. So too little crew. So I have had many, many hours over the last 7 years that I can't get home to see my family. I can't get to meetings that I've scheduled for a company that's paying me to go. So I just really felt that it was important for you guys to hear from someone who this directly impacts from a company and from a personal standpoint. I choose to live here. I don't have to live in Riverton. I choose to live here because I want to live here. So having reliable air service so that I can have a career is really important. And I know that it impacts people in Lander. I fly with a ton of other frequent flyers. There is not a time I fly that there's not someone usually from Knowles on that plane. I mean, there are a ton of frequent flyers, and it impacts. And I'll tell you right now, that I fly into Casper now, half of those people are sitting at that airport, or they're sitting up in the Jackson airport. So it is a concern. I'm cognizant of the issues that, Great Lakes does employ, people that have jobs here. And the people in our town are fantastic. We know them, we live in a small community. But when we get to Denver, we're just another face to a very grumpy group of people who deal with a lot of issues on a daily basis. It's not fun for the Great Lakes employees to have to cancel, 17 flights a day and then have to deal with the disgruntled passengers. So aircrafts, non-reliability, flight time, weight restrictions, there's a lot of fundamental issues with the management of that company. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. It's important to note, too, that I think just looking around this room that just about everybody here can give some sort of similar story. I can as well. I fly quite a bit, and reliability it was up and down over the years, but really since this last October, November, things have gotten considerably less consistent, worse, dismal, whatever adjective you'd like to use. But when you look at the service that we have versus some of the other options that we have, everything has to be considered very carefully, because although it's an industry problem and Great Lakes has their issues as well, every airline has their issues. So as we move forward, our goal is reliable air service to Riverton, not somebody else's airline service to Riverton. We have to weigh it very carefully to make certain that we get the right carrier in here that's going to service the needs of Riverton. So this isn't a new conversation. This is something that has been ongoing. The Riverton City Council and the Riverton Airport Board have been working towards reliable air service. In many ways, our hands have been tied, but we try to jump on every opportunity to increase that reliability. We have to have reliable air service, and although it's a Riverton airport, it's important to note that this airport affects the entire community. Not just Fremont County, but Thermopolis, Hot Springs County. People come to Riverton from a lot of different areas to fly from Riverton. So I think we've determined over the years that in the last study, the Riverton Airport brings $32 million to the economy. And that's not just to the Riverton economy, that's Fremont County, that's Lander, that's Du Bois, that's the entire area. So it is important to our community that this works and becomes more reliable. Would anybody else like to say anything? Great. Okay, any board members? Start with you, Bob. You like to say anything? Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, didn't see you stand there.
Hi, I'm Randy Kimmel, and I work for Avis Rent-A-Car up at the
Morning,
airport.
Randy.
I just feel like it's very important that we do something to get a airline service in here, because Fremont County is booming. I have a lot of customers from everywhere, and they're very disappointed in Great Lakes, and we understand all the issues with that, but they love to fly in here. Like Mrs. Becker said, people are great, and we are very personal. We have lost just last month, we lost over $3,000 in revenue just in my company. We have people that are very discouraged to fly into Casper, rent a car there, drive here, and have to drive out to Lysite and go to work, and they just really dislike that, and they really don't want to lose flying into here. And our business is, we're really feeling the hurt, and so I just hope that we can come to something that will work for us, because we have a huge opportunity for a lot of business, and we all realize that. But anyway,
Right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for your input.
Kimmel.
Before I move on again, if anybody else would like to speak. And you're right, it's important. I think a lot of community just sees it as a problem with not being able to fly in and out of Riverton. and they don't oftentimes think of the effects that it has on other businesses directly, like yours, and the cafe, and a lot of other establishments that are affected by people, hotels, motels, and really, if you don't have reliable air service, why move to Riverton? Why bring your business here? So it's important and it's paramount that we get this addressed.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was telling Cindy this morning that I have a problem that somewhere between Tourette's and old age maybe, but I never know what I'm going to say till I say it. But I think Commissioner Allen educated us a few weeks ago, and if you would, Commissioner, just let's reiterate that point about the impact on economic development. I think this group needs to hear that again.
Larry Allen, Fremont County Commissioner. Like I stated before, we have great concerns about the economic development in the county. You know, we have a lot of things riding on good air service. You know, we've got uranium mine starting in Jeffrey City. We got the Manita Divide project. You know, the Manita Divide project will employ 12 to 1,600 people for upwards of 20 years. You know, if we can't get reliable air service in the county or into Riverton, those folks are going to go to Casper or elsewhere, and they're going to be based out of there, and all their people will be based out of there. So the economic impact of the county is going to be astronomical. We just, you know, like the person said before, her company won't allow her to fly out of Riverton anymore. Well, ConocoPhillips is almost the same way. Encana's the same way. Devon's the same way. You know, those folks employ a lot of people. We just have to get something reliable and that we can count on. The uranium company that's starting in Jeffrey City, they're going to employ 600 folks for a minimum of 5 years, and then they'll get down to their workforce, which will still be over 300 people. We just can't continue going on the way it is. You know, the other airports, Cody, Jackson, Casper, they're all got reliable air service, and you know, look at their volumes that they're having now. So, like I said, the economic impact is just going to be devastating to us if we don't get something reliable that we can all count on.
And Commissioner, aren't some of these companies now encouraging their employees to live in Natrona County?
Oh, exactly.
Reliable air service, so houses are not being built here, and they work here in Fremont County, but they're encouraged to live near the Casper Airport.
Well, exactly, and Natrona County is actively recruiting these companies and promoting their airport, and for those folks to move into Casper. So, you know, and they have a good argument. You can fly in and out of here anytime you want, and it's reliable.
And most of these companies need their employees to be able to go to Houston or wherever on a...
Oh, yes, nationwide, worldwide, actually. They, you know, well, my wife works for ConocoPhillips, and a lot of those folks that work there, rather than fly out of Riverton and get a chance of not making their connections, they drive to Casper and they fly out of Casper. And all the major companies that have any kind of a workforce that have to be there will be there. Knowles, for instance, we had a conversation this morning. Some of those folks, when they fly in for their training, and they may miss 1-2 days of training, and then they have to start reschedule everybody around, make different connections, make a whole new arrangement for those folks that can't make their connection.
And so my point is that affects all of us here. Houses are not being built in Fremont County. I don't know, somebody's going to do an economic study one of these days. This is how many houses need to be built before you get another drugstore or another franchise. And I just think that's a very big picture that we need to be looking at about reliable air service, and I appreciate you giving us that insight a few meetings ago.
Sure. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Allen. If you would come up to the microphone, yes, please, ma'am.
My name is Helen Morris. I got bumped off or kicked off or canceled the last flight coming home a week ago. I had to go to Illinois on emergency for a funeral. My husband had to drive down to Denver to pick me up. That was not very inconvenient. And to fly, I'm not a computer person. My daughter does everything for me on the computer. To get me home, the only other way, they were going to put me up in a hotel for 2 or 3 days. That is not acceptable. And to fly into Casper the next day was $600. That is aggravation, and I don't need the aggravation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I don't have anything at this time.
Mr. Manson? Any comments?
No.
Okay. Bruce?
Well, that's kind of the new guy on the block here. This will be my 5th summer in the 2nd year coming on the board here. And being a pilot and involved in airports for the last 30 years, I find it interesting to be involved in a small community like this with such a nice airport. I've flown into Worland, and I see they're building a large airport in Thermopolis, and I just wonder, you know, how well does the communities within Fremont County support this airport? Not just flying in and out of it, but what financial incentives or support has come from Lander and Du Bois, the county, and that kind of stuff. This is the kind of things I've been looking at, and you know, in order to have a good airport, everybody has to kind of kick in, and I guess, you know, with the people from the different communities represented here, that's a thought that you all ought to consider, is that, hey, you know, if we want reliable air service and we want to keep this airport active, then everybody has to put a little skin in the game. So.
Thank you, Bruce. Mr. Hurd, any comments?
Thanks, Chairman. I think there's, been good points made by everybody, and we need to take a look at those, and that's what we're here for. So let's get after it. Let's find some solutions.
Great, thank you. I think it's important to mention too that our Riverton staff that man our station, Clyde and his staff, they do a really amazing job working with the people. And when you have 19 people standing in front of you, or 25 people standing in front of you, and every one of them's upset because the flight's been canceled through no fault of their own, they do work really hard to make sure that people get contacted and rescheduled. And that being said, everybody hates being rescheduled, but I want to make sure that we recognize publicly the work that the staff up there does, because they do a great job. Okay, moving on to the White Dot Aeronautics presentation. Paul, if you want to make
Mr. Chairman,
introductions.
invited White Dot Aeronautics to come up and do a presentation to us. We had them do a conference, if you recall, back in December, I believe it was. And so with us today, we have White Dot Aeronautics Administrator Dennis Byrne, and with him Sherry Taylor is the Air Service Development Manager, and then we also have Nick Wangler with his company Forecast Incorporated. So I'll turn it over to them and let them.
Great.
Mr. Chairman, for having us.
Good morning.
I thought we would start with Sorry about that. And then I thought we would open it up to questions and discussion once Nick completes his presentation.
Great, thank you. And I'm not sure if that microphone's on or not.
It is.
Is it okay?
We're on TV, so we have
Mr. Chairman, this is on, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm not sure who was in the room back in December who had the opportunity to listen to the dismal presentation, but you get to hear pieces of it again this morning. I really want to kind of touch on 3 things, but I'm going to throw a lot at you. So if you have questions, interrupt me as I go through them. If it's something that I'm going to address later as I talk about stuff, I'll let you know, and then I'll just continue on. But otherwise, I'll do my best to answer the questions. Really, what I want to talk about is what's going on with the industry today. Talk a little bit about the program, the Air Service Enhancement Program with Wyoming, and then lastly, I know just through talking with Paul and getting some ideas on the kinds of things you guys wanted to hear, talk specifically about Riverton and some what-if scenarios and sort of where to from here. So. The first thing I want to talk about is actually I'll give you a chance to look at these logos for a second. A lot of the stuff that I have in here is going to be based on what did the industry look like back in 2004. 2004 is when the Air Service Enhancement Program started. So it's really looking at who was around, and then since that time, who has either gone into bankruptcy, who's merged with somebody else. Who's gone away entirely, restructured completely, and what you see is the graphic of disappearing airlines. So what you end up having with is you've had a lot of mergers. I'll talk in a second of really who's left, but the mergers of recent years. There's a merger on here that took place a couple of months ago that isn't even identified yet. But just looking between United and Continental and U.S. Airways and America West and so on and so forth. As they combine their capacity in the domestic market decreases. Creates a lot of problems, and it creates a lot of problems in stuff that we're looking at for the U.S. Here's a good example. Cincinnati. If you look at what they had versus what they have, what they had in August, significant loss of flights. They went from 125 destinations now down to 42. TWA in St. Louis, once upon a time, had a major hub in St. Louis. You could go, internationally to Europe and Mexico and Hawaii and so on and so forth. Now with the merger with American Airlines that took place several years ago, 6 of those routes live today. And again, this, I could spend the whole morning doing nothing other than talking about maps and showing what people have done and what's going on in the industry. Since 2004, 17% of the flights have come out of the U.S. domestic industry, 11% of the seats. So one of the big challenges that we look at is the dominance of the airlines, and I'll give you a good example. 10 years ago, if you wanted to get air service to Denver, maybe it was talking to United, maybe it was talking to Great Lakes, maybe it was looking at Frontier and using some of the smaller equipment at the time they had. There were lots of choices. The problem we have now is when you have 4 guys who control nearly 90% of the capacity, picking up the phone and saying, we got to fix our air service, let's call somebody and get service to Minneapolis. Well, you got one guy to call. I know a lot of Wyoming with, the natural resources and coal and oil and gas and those kinds of things. There's a lot of tendency to have travel into Houston and Dallas and those kinds of things. Today, if you want service to Houston, you're calling a guy who lives in Chicago. So the dynamics have changed significantly of who we talk to and we call. So who's left? Really, we're looking at 4 major carriers. American and U.S. Airways announced their merger. You'll see over the next couple of years, the U.S. Airways brand go away and be replaced with American. You're left with a small handful of larger regionals that do some pretty specific niche flying, and then you have some of the low-cost carriers and their partner, and then the partner airlines. The Great Lakes and the SkyWests and those kinds of guys that are doing some specific regionalized flying. I think the last of the 2 maps I want to show you is just to give everybody an idea of what's happened with the smaller airplanes in the industry. The Beechcraft 1900, if you look at it back in August of 2003, 300 nonstop destination serves that airplane. Fast forward to this past August, that's dropped to 88. If you look at the Embraer Brasilia 120 or the Saab 340, both essentially 30-seat airplanes, again, significant changes in what's happened with that airplane. The reason that I'm showing these slides is we constantly have the discussion of, at some point in time, these airplanes are simply going to stop flying. They're going to get old, they're going to get expensive, they're going to be harder to maintain. We're going to have a lot of issues with them, and just over the last 10 years, they've made some pretty dramatic changes in the industry in terms of what they've done. And a lot of those changes have kind of occurred in our neck of the woods where a lot of that capacity has come out. Now, the thing that I want to point out here that's also interesting with what the industry has done in terms of consolidation. In August of 03, there were 915 destinations served with these airplanes. That number now today is 400 less in 10 years. Now recognizing on the map of the 517, that includes nonstop pairs that have grown into regional jet flying. You know, maybe in 2003 they had Brazilians flying on them and they were a big enough market where there's regional jets. But the point being, in 10 years we've seen 400 routes just vanish, and that is going to continue with the continued growth and the continued consolidation, I should say, in the industry. I know we've heard some folks in the audience this morning already touch on some of the pilot issues and the challenges and things like that came about from FAR 117. Over the last 60 days, you've had ExpressJet and United essentially tell the world they're pulling out of the Cleveland hub. So another map that a couple of years down the road I can show you, here's what Cleveland had in 2014 and here's what they have today. It's going to be dramatic changes. ExpressJet is turning back the leases on, I want to say, 27 of their 50-seat regional jet airplanes. Now, they're simply not releasing them, not keeping the airplanes. They don't have the pilots to fly them. United pulls out of Cleveland. You have, of course, Great Lakes has been public in talking about some of the challenges they've had with finding the crews and looking at some of the things they've done. Republic has done similar things where they've shut down flying. They've gotten rid of some of the smaller airplanes. Same challenges. Silver Airways, they were in Montana a couple of years ago flying essential air service stuff. They're a company based in Florida. Same thing. These are challenges that are affecting a lot of the regional players as these rules have gone into effect and the regulations have changed. The Uniteds and the Americans and the Deltas of the world have simply hired the guys from the smaller regionals that have had the time. So going back to 2008, if I went back to 2004, this map would be a lot more cluttered than it is showing here, but this isn't a problem specific to one community or one state or one region of the country. Across the board, we're seeing air service simply go away. Smaller communities are going to have a challenge in holding on to what they have. They're going to have a challenge growing. A lot of the things that we hear from the airlines that we work with is, if you lose it, probably not going to come back. The way the industry is going, Riverton's air service 10 years from now or 5 years from now or whatever may be just fine, but it may be in Casper. That may be where it ends up becoming. And you guys are no different than cities across the country. It's maintaining quality service and supporting it. Because pick up the phone and call any one of these guys and ask them about economic development and quality of life and all those kinds of things that are key to a community, and find out how much that's changed since that air service. So a big change of what's caused a lot of this is you go back to oil. Back on this slide in 1995 and fast forwarding all the way through 2004, the industry generally paid less than $1 a gallon to put fuel in the wings of an airplane. If you turn back the clock from 1995 and you turn around and you look behind you, 83, 76, 1954, whatever the time period is, the cost for fuel has never been above $1 a gallon. That's been a pretty stable constant, and fast forward to where we're looking at today, that's changed, and the industry has to deal with higher prices. So to compete with that, they've done a couple of things. They've consolidated, they've merged, they've pulled capacity out of the industry, which arbitrarily has made. You used to get on an airplane and look behind you and there'd be 30 open seats, and you do that today and there's 2 or 3 open seats. Airplanes are flying around, they're a lot fuller. You're now paying $25 to check a bag. You may be paying $15 to reserve your seat in advance of flying of where do you want to sit. You're paying $3 to get a bottle of water. I mean, there's There's a lot of the ancillary fees that have come into play to combat some of this stuff, and the growth rate since then. The growth rate since a lot of this stuff has taken place is, the industry has gotten smaller. A couple of examples. If you take United and Continental's schedule in 2003, they paid $2 billion for fuel. If you take that same schedule and fly it right now, last year, that same schedule was $6.8 billion in fuel. They've had almost a $5 billion increase in the price of fuel to fly the same schedule, fast forward 10 years. What's astonishing is you can play the same game with Wyoming. If you look at what Wyoming had, again in 2003, the schedule we flew cost the airlines approximately $11.5 million. That same schedule flown today is about $37 million. So when you look at it, the airlines that are flying are paying $25 million more in fuel alone to fly in the state. So it presents challenges to the individual communities. It presents challenges certainly to the Air Service Enhancement Program, where this program was designed in 2004, when you could turn around and say, look, behind us, everything was $1 a gallon. The contracts that we deal with now are contracts where we're pushing $4 a gallon in the contracts that we're working with the airlines. So the airlines are now having to find a way to cover $25 million in cost a year through our program, and it's a challenge. It's definitely been a challenge. But it's not only fuel. If you look at SkyWest, we do quite a bit of work with statewide in quite a few communities. Some cost stuff they've shared with us is, if you look at, it's not only the rise in fuel, but as the airplanes get older, they become more expensive to maintain. Mr. Chairman, you made a comment that the industry needs 20% more pilots to cover the existing flying they're doing today because of the new regulation changes. Those are numbers that have been echoed by SkyWest. When this regulation took effect, they talked to us about the fact that our costs are going to go up simply because we got to go hire more guys to fly what we're doing today. So it's kind of been across the board in some of these changes. So to kind of put it this way, we have a scale where we have the Air Service Enhancement Program. The state has as a tool on one side of the scale, and we have all these other things going against us. We heard this morning about weight restrictions. The issues of the airplanes flying in hot and high airports. We have the fuel prices and on and on and on. These are all things that we try to combat, that we try and look at, that we try and discuss, that we try and talk about, and we try and stay on top of. So again, when you look at the Air Service Enhancement Program, and you really look at 2004 when this thing was designed, you had a very long, healthy aviation history that this program was designed around. Fast forward to what we've seen in the last 10 years, that's not been the case. So clearly the way that this program was intended to be designed is quite a bit different than what the industry has given us. So the doom and the gloom part of the presentation is over. So the rest is I do want to talk about the successes we've seen. I want to talk a little bit about the program itself and what it's set out to do. So the Senate File 16 essentially says what we're trying to do is, and I'll kind of paraphrase some of these for you. We're trying to increase enplanements in each of the commercial airports in the state. We're focused on making sure that our airports stay at or above 10,000 enplanements. For those of you who don't know, and I know Paul is very well aware of this number, as soon as you fall below 10,000 enplanements, you get entitlement money every year from the FAA. That's $1 million. That right now is what Riverton's getting. If that number drops below 10,000, the check you get every year drops from $1 million to $150,000. So a significant amount of change in the kind of money that the airport has to pave runways and build fences and just kind of maintain what you're doing. Statewide, Worland is the only airport in the state that doesn't get to 10,000, and I'm not sure historically if they ever have. I know that the numbers we're looking at in 2014, we have concerns that Riverton, there's a chance that you guys may not get there this year. With what's happened the first couple of months, looking at the employments, there's a chance, and that that becomes an issue. We want to increase the number of passengers originating in the state. I'll go through some slides in a little bit to talk about leakage. We have the data that allows us to go in and say, okay, of 100 people that bought a ticket in Riverton's defined catchment area, and I'll kind of show you that in a second, how many of them are using our airport? How many of them are driving to Casper or Jackson or Cody or wherever they're going? But this program's intent is to keep people flying locally. We don't want somebody who lives in Gillette to drive over to Rapid City and fly. We don't want somebody in Cody going up to Billings. We don't want the guys in Cheyenne and Laramie driving down to Denver, because that takes economic dollars from our communities and monies from the airport and PFCs and parking revenues and rental cars and all those kinds of things away. So we focus on keeping that stuff here. Increasing the frequency, if we have better schedules, we have better connectivity, it's better for inbound business, all those kinds of things. Increase the consistency of the service, making sure it's on time, making sure it's reliable, and then making sure the airfares are competitive. We're never going to have quote unquote low airfares as a state. The goal isn't necessarily to have low airfares as a state. The goal is to have competitive fares. So when somebody chooses to fly to Riverton versus debating on do I drive to Denver or Salt Lake, what's the difference? And can we do something to minimize those differences? So to date, we actually looked at this last week. Between the state and the local communities, we've spent approximately $27 million in the 11 years now, or 10 years and change of the existence of this program. And Riverton was one of the original communities that actually used this program back in 2004. And we have either directly or indirectly through this program affected every one of the 10 commercial airports in the state. To let you be aware of the kinds of things we look at, I won't go through a lot of this stuff, but there really isn't a factoid that we can't tell you. We monitor airfares. We've monitored airfares in the state every week since October 2008. We monitor, what does somebody buy out of Riverton to go to your top 25 markets? How does that compare in Casper? How does that compare in Salt Lake? How does that compare in Denver? We're constantly looking at passenger loads and load factors, and I'm bugging Paul's folks on, hey, can I get the stats? How did we do last month? There's a whole bunch of data that we've collected, and we've done so now for quite a while. And this data has been incredibly valuable in us going to the airlines and telling our story. We've used it to talk to United Airlines about Cody. 5 years ago, Cody retained a third of their customers. The other 2/3 went to Billings. We went and had a conversation with United about that. Showed them some of the stuff we looked at, talked to about it. United agreed to change Cody's pricing to be a little bit more competitive with Billings. Cody now retains 2/3 of their customers. And this summer they're going to have nonstop service starting to Chicago. So there have been successes. We've used this data when essential air service providers changed in Laramie to again go and talk to United about getting some fare parity with Denver in Laramie. I've got a slide in here that I'll talk about that a little bit about how that's done, but we don't deliberately collect a lot of data just because we collect it and we find ways that we can use it. We find ways that we can use it to tell our story and talk about what we're doing. If you go back and you look at Wyoming prior to this program, domestic capacity during this period was up about 8 points. If you look at Wyoming, we were down 2. Fast forward to what we've done since. Wyoming's capacity is up 36%, or excuse me, the passengers we've carried through 2012 were up 36%. Significant improvement in enplanements. During that same time, U.S. domestically grew about the same. In 2013, which is a slide that's not on, or a number that's not on this specific slide, the state of Wyoming had its all-time best passenger boarding year ever last year. The things that we're looking at today, based on the capacity we have, based on everything that's going around in all the commercial airports, we believe 2014 will be another record. So, there's a lot of doom and gloom going on in the industry, but Wyoming's kind of this little star out there that's really faring pretty well. if you look at now, this is airfare changes since 2003, and I apologize for the Wyoming passenger traffic is up 36%. That meant to be for another slide, but I told you we spent a lot of time talking to airlines about fares. If you look at what our airfares have done over the last 10 years, our airfares have gone up a little bit, but when you look at the rest of the industry, the airfares have gone up 30%. We haven't done that. Now, what that's not saying is it's not saying that, 10 years ago, our airfares were already at a higher number. So they only went up a little bit. And a lot of other states have kind of caught up with us over time. I talked a little bit about domestic capacity, where all these guys are merging and capacity is going away and seats are falling and all those kinds of things. That's happening in the United States. That's not happening in Wyoming. We've seen that our capacity has increased quite a bit. Second only to North Dakota at this point in terms of what's happened. And again, the average is down, and we've managed to buck that trend. Since the start of the program, we've seen 2 million new passengers the state of Wyoming fly. That equates to 775,000 people who have come to Wyoming visiting, who have flown to Wyoming on airplanes and have come to Riverton or Jackson or Sheridan, wherever. I know the state, we recently completed an economic impact study. There's huge, this is huge for the state. I mean, the economics of it, of people coming here and staying in hotels and renting our cars and eating in our restaurants and all those kinds of things. So, these are numbers that we're very proud of. We're very proud of seeing how well we've done, how many folks we've carried. Again, I said 2013 was a record. You guys are interested in Riverton, and Riverton was up slightly year over year from where you were at in 2012. I'll talk about Laramie in a little bit. Essentially, every community in the state grew, with a couple of exceptions, and really those exceptions are Rock Springs, Gillette, and Cheyenne. Rock Springs and Gillette lost one of 3 flights a day to Denver, so they went from 3 flights a day to 2. So that had some drop in enplanements. And Cheyenne in 2013 was comparing it to 2012 when they still had American Airlines in there to Dallas. So their service is down as well, but they've also lost some capacity. As a state, this bottom kind of purplish color, a little over 40% of the state in total uses their home airport. How many people live in Riverton that fly out of Riverton? How many people live in Riverton that go to the Orange Bar are going to other airports? As a state in general, we roughly retain about 50% of our passengers. We update this number every single month. We look at it all the time. We look at each of the individual communities all the time and understand where, how many is Riverton retain? What's Laramie doing? What's Rock Springs doing? When the price goes up in Rock Springs, what happens to the retention? When the third flight goes away in Rock Springs, what happens to the retention? These are all things that we use and work together and look at this kind of stuff. And 2013 was the first year that we flew more of our own passengers in the state of Wyoming than we sent to Denver, which is a good thing. It's a good thing for the state. So let me talk specifically about Riverton. This little map is nothing other than pulling up what did you guys sell, what was sold in 2013 that flew out of your airport. Where do they come from? And the darker colors are the higher concentration of where the passengers came from. And this is simply spitting it out by zip code. So you're getting guys that are over in Gillette, that maybe they're over there for working in the oil fields or whatever, and they have reason to come to Riverton, and so you're getting little pockets from kind of all over the state where they're coming from. This is no different than if I were to show you Laramie's map or show you Sheridan's map. It does the same thing. You get people from kind of all over the state, but you can at least see the concentration of where your folks are coming from. The other thing that's interesting is if you, over the course of the year, look at 100% of your people, 44% of them start here. 56% of anybody getting on your airplane doesn't live in Riverton. They came here from Houston. They came here from LA. They came here from Boston. They came here from Atlanta. That's a big deal when you think about quality air service, economic impact, those kinds of things, because the majority of your traffic is coming here. They're coming here for business. They're coming here because I used to live here and you're visiting family, whatever. But that's something to keep in mind, that the base of your customer is not necessarily Riverton. It's folks coming here. If you look at your retention, in 2012, 39% of everything you sold in Riverton used your airport. And now when I say in Riverton, think of that map a little bit. Du Bois, Thermopolis, looking at some of these communities around here, who's using your airport. You sent 19% of them to Casper. You sent another 26% of them to Denver. And then just sort of fast forward to 2014, the percentage grew to Casper, which kind of makes sense when you hear some of the comments this morning earlier of some of the reliability challenges and things like that. I got to fly out of Casper because I need to get there. Well, we see it in the data. We see it in the numbers that we look at. If you look at your retention and simply look at January, in 2012, January 2012, you kept a little over 50% of your customers. Fast forward 2013, 47. This year, 35. These are numbers that are consistent that we've seen in the state. We've had similar conversations with Sheridan. We've had similar conversations, in Worland. These are statistics that we see when communities have some of the operational challenges that you've had. The numbers fall. I mean, it makes sense. It shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be a shock. The one thing this doesn't tell you is what's happening to the guy who's coming to visit you. If 56% of your airplane is people coming to visit you, what are those guys doing? Are they flying into Casper and driving over? Are they flying into Denver and driving up? I mean, those are the kinds of things that from a state standpoint, we really want to avoid. We want people to fly where they're going. We want them to fly here. It only makes sense. The latest DOT, U.S. DOT data that's out for looking at airfares goes through the third quarter of 2013. Fourth quarter stuff should be out soon. We shared this slide a couple of weeks ago. Gosh, I don't remember the audience. I think we were talking to just in general the Aeronautics Commission and kind of talking about what's going on. You guys have not only you've seen a pretty big increase in your average airfares out of here over the last year, and that comes along with some of this industry consolidation. When you have less capacity and there's more people fighting for those seats, you're going to end up paying more in airfares, and we're seeing that. And again, Laramie is a little bit of an anomaly, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. When we look at 2014, if you draw a line in the sand, when we put this slide together a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the information that we had, and this is what we see. We see that statewide, we're probably going to grow as a state, and we still hold on to that belief. But as we go through and we look at some individual communities, you guys being one of them, we don't see that, and you're certainly seeing that with the early indications. January, February numbers are down. Your capacity year over year is about the same, but we just see that there's been a drop in enplanements, and it's a trend that's holding steady for a while. So let's talk a little bit about the program, and I know the mayor spoke on this a little bit, and you guys have formed a committee, and we'll just kind of talk through this a little bit in terms of what we see, and maybe give you guys some pointers, but. Really, there's a couple of things you need to do, and it sounds like you're already starting with that process. What do you want? What service do you want? Do you want service to Salt Lake? Do you want service to Minneapolis? Do you want service to some other destination? But really determining what you want. Are you targeting a business airline, somebody that's going to fly 2 or 3 flights a day to someplace? Do you want somebody like Allegiant to show up with 2 flights a day or 2 flights a week to Vegas? Those kinds of things. You have to kind of determine as a community what's important, understand, and why is it important? Do I want 150 people showing up twice a week to go to Vegas? Or do I want 30 people showing up every single day to fly to Denver and connect beyond? Those are things that the community really needs to understand and think of the pros and cons. Set up a task force. Who's in charge of this? Who's talking about it? Who's rallying the troops? Who's communicating to the community? Who's raising money? What kind of money are you looking at to go out and get somebody? There are quote after quote after quote of airline CEOs over the last couple of years saying, we're simply not going to show up. We're not going to take the risk. If you want us to show up, there needs to be an incentive for us to show up that's a financial commitment that proves that the revenues are going to be there. That proves that if we're not going to show up in your community and walk away a year later because we've lost $2 million, those days are gone. There's not enough guys to call. There's not enough competition in the industry. And we've seen that in the state. We've seen that now for a while, is that we have to come up with incentives to get the airlines to show up, and that's not going to change. Going back to the community involvement, chances are excellent, when you go down this path and you decide to address it and look at it, it's not going to be okay, well, let's come up with this package for 1 year. It's going to be a long-term deal. It's going to be a long-term commitments from the community of constant support. Now, the original intent, I think if you ask the folks who set the program up, was we'll support an airline for 2 or 3 years. We'll get them on their feet. We'll get the community used to them. They'll fly and they'll be great and they'll be profitable. If you want, I can go back through the first part of this presentation that talks about how fuel has changed and the cost of the airplanes and new federal regulations for pilots. The industry is totally different from the intent of what this is set up to do. We've seen that in communities in Wyoming where they have signed up to get air service and they're still paying for it. The revenue number they started with the first year is significantly not different than what it is today. It's a lot better, but the economics have changed. The cost of the airplanes are getting more. So keep in mind, this isn't something you start and a year from now you walk away and say, woohoo, we won, and let's go back to doing what we used to do. I mean, this has to be a community-focused thing that becomes a budget in what you look at every year. And somebody stares at it, and somebody's talking about it and looking at it and really supporting the carrier, because the relationships that the state has with the airlines, every single one of them could be profitable, but it's a matter of 40% of your market flies out of your airport, 60% is going somewhere else. If you push that number to 80%, when the next guy shows up, you don't have to worry about writing checks. It's going to work. And that's really what's key to this. So, after you figure out what you want, who do you want to talk to? What airline do you want to target? Talking with them about the contracts and negotiating the contracts and those kinds of things. What's reasonable, what's not. And then, the actual grant application. And Sherry, I think, can probably better talk through some of this kind of stuff. And I don't know, Sherry, if the community has specific questions about it, or if you want me to finish and then we can ask specific questions. So let me talk through some of the potential scenarios. Okay, so do nothing. 2014, you're in danger of losing your 10,000 enplanements. Is that the end of the world? No. Does it change your entitlements from the FAA? Yeah, it's going to. There is a potential. What if there's a potential elimination that the scheduled service you have simply goes away? Nobody knows that. Whether it's SkyWest or United or Great Lakes or anybody, we simply don't know that tomorrow morning they don't call us and say, you know what, doesn't work, we're out. You face the less frequency, less capacity. I know there are operational challenges of gee, you schedule this many flights, but using the only numbers you're operating. What if they take the schedule and they only schedule 1 flight a day? Well, that's a risk. That's something, and there's certainly a potential that there isn't anybody else. We go down this path and we try and find something, and maybe there's nothing to find. You can find a way to fix what you have today. Maybe there's a way to talk them about fixing some of the operational challenges or fixing the airfares and those kinds of things. That's certainly a scenario, and it's certainly one that I would encourage you to discuss and think about. You solicit somebody to show up. Well, if you do that, do you scare off the guy you have? I don't know that answer. What's going to happen is you're definitely going to grow overall passenger volumes. Your market shouldn't be split. And what I mean by that is there's a couple of examples I can point to. And I don't remember the specific year, but once upon a time, Sheridan had 3 flights a day on Big Sky Airlines out of Montana that flew to Denver. Great Lakes came in and competed with them. Sheridan had their best enplanements ever. I mean, they were pushing through if I remember the number correctly, roughly 60,000 passengers in and out in a year when they had two carriers competing. I'll show you a slide in a second with Gillette and Rock Springs. That's where essentially both of them are at today. Cody is there today. Your population is of significant enough size that you should be doing, there shouldn't be any reason you guys can't do 60,000 people in and out in a year. And you're doing, I think, about half of that. I think you're at 28,000 roughly. There's enough people around here to support that level, if not more. I can tell you, Gillette does about 60,000 a year. They're still only retaining about 60% of their customers. So what happens if they push that number to 80%? Well, now they're doing 70 or 80,000. These are numbers that are possible because we already know they exist. They're not using our carriers. What if you go after a new market? Rock Springs and Gillette have had Salt Lake service now since July of 2008. It's taken a long time to grow into it. Gillette today is doing twice the passenger volume to Salt Lake that it did the first year the service started on the same capacity. It's taken a while to grow into it. It's taken a while for customers to realize it's there and embrace it and all those kinds of things. It's a long road. It could be costly. It could cost a lot of money. And one thing that we have seen with it, with two carriers in going to, I don't want to say two different destinations because it's not necessarily destination driven, it's competing airlines. Gillette and Salt Lake's fares have dropped dramatically because we've had the ability of going in to talk to Delta. We've had the ability of going in and talk to United about pricing structures. And when one of them changes, the other guy changes. And when there's only two guys there and nobody's changing fares, it's a lot easier to get them to change them and make them lower and make them more competitive because they're not saying, oh, well, let's make this price go up $100 today. They may look at it once a year. So we've seen some positive effects of having the competitive service and what it's done from an airfare standpoint. What have some of the other communities done? And I just kind of want to show you this. So the blue with a box around it is you guys and what your employments have done. And I went back to 96. I think that's the stats that I have just about for everybody in the state. At that time, Riverton was essentially just as big as Rock Springs and Gillette. Fast forward through the years, in 2008, what happened was Gary Valentine and Jay Lundell got together and said, gee, we really want to get Salt Lake City service in here. How do we do it? Let's work together. And they did, and they convinced SkyWest to come in with service to Delta, service on Delta to Salt Lake, 2 flights a day. Within 3 weeks of Delta announcing they were coming in, United said, well, you're not going to do that. We're going to do it too. So they announced service on their own dime, and United went in there right away. So literally overnight, we saw capacity in both of the markets triple. Salt Lake was intentional. We wanted to try and do that, and the communities wanted to try and do that. The United coming into Denver wasn't something we envisioned. Great Lakes was there. They were doing great. Both communities had 3 flights a day. United showed up. And then what's happened over time, and there's a lot of detail behind the story, but ultimately, Great Lakes is not in either one of those markets anymore. SkyWest is serving them on their own. They have 2 flights a day to Salt Lake. They have 2 flights a day to Denver. And then really in 2013 is you see the numbers fall off a little bit. And that's nothing other than them losing that. They lost their 3rd flight in May 1st of last year. So that's why the numbers have gone down. But really this is to point out to you guys that there's no reason you shouldn't have 60,000 people coming through your airport every year, in and out, and the economics that it's going to create. I do want to talk about Laramie a little bit because it kind of is an interesting success story, if you will. I said earlier that the program has helped every single community in the state, either directly or indirectly. There wasn't anything that we necessarily did with Laramie to facilitate this change in terms of financial commitment. We worked with Laramie to have conversations with United about adjusting fares. We worked with Laramie to open their eyes that maybe they ought to solicit competitive bids for the essential air service, and they did. SkyWest happened to be one of the competitive bids, and in November of 2012 they showed up. So they've now had SkyWest for a year. And really, if you look at it, what's happened is the capacity has gone up because Laramie's gone from 19 flights a week on 19 seats to 14 flights a week on 30. So the math of it is their capacity's gone up. but their load factors have gone up dramatically. You know, the reliability has gone up dramatically, on-time performance has gone up dramatically, and those have been, you know, challenges that we've seen in other communities in the state. And when some of that stuff has been fixed, the results have been pretty good. You know, the retention last year, they retained, or in 2012, they retained 11% of their passengers. You guys retained 40. This year, you know, woohoo, we're at 21, but it's a dramatic improvement from where we've been. Now their geography is a little different. You guys can jump in a car in an hour and a half later, be in Casper. They can jump in a car in an hour and a half, be in Denver. Where last we looked at it, there's 186 nonstop destinations you can fly to. So, you know, just different characteristics of the markets. Clear as day, no questions. Everybody's good. And certainly, you know, Mr. Chairman, Mayor, if there are questions we can answer, if there are things that, you know, hey, this was confusing, you're going too fast, go back over it. Well, you know, we're here to talk about it. We're here to help facilitate some of that kind of stuff. So,
I think, Nick, some of our challenges that might be a little bit more unique than some of the other communities. The other communities you discuss are county-owned airports, and Riverton is a city-owned airport, which means that the cost of operations, the cost of services, all of those costs have been burdened by the citizens of Riverton. And although the county does pay into that support, other communities haven't historically. So although this airport serves the community, it has been supported by Riverton. So when we try to draw comparisons between task force that work towards a common community or county goal, it's somewhat completely different when it's a city-owned airport. How can we deal with that challenge to make sure that we're representing the citizens of Riverton who have actually burdened the costs all these years, as well as moving forward with the community and making it and getting their input? Because ultimately we have to work through the city council as a city airport. The county's expressed over the years their disinterest in making it a county airport. We've gone through the way of the task force in the past. So having an understanding of where we've been should be able to provide us some direction moving forward. So I'm curious to hear your take.
I'll answer this as best I can, and I don't know if Dennis will have any input to this. As far as the Air Service Enhancement Program is concerned, I can talk a little bit about some specifics, because I don't know if you're unique in the sense that you're the only one in the state that is supported by the city. I don't know that. But what I can tell you is Rock Springs, for example. The monies that Rock Springs puts up for the revenue guarantees are monies that come from the community of Rock Springs, the community of Green River, and Sweetwater County. They're divided equally amongst the three. Gillette is the exact opposite of you guys, where the monies that they put up for the revenue guarantee come from Campbell County. And they're asking the same very questions you are, except the county is saying, well, why isn't the city helping with this? Or why isn't Wright helping with this? Or why isn't some of these other surrounding counties who are using our service helping with this? What we've seen in some of the other communities that are looking at going down this path, the kinds of questions they're asking us are, it's great that I know how many people are using my airport, but how many are coming from this county over here who doesn't have one? Or what about these guys over here? Because when it comes time to saying, all right, we're ready to do this and we want to put an application in, it's conversations they've had with their surrounding counties saying, hey, did you know that 20% of your people are using this airport? So I don't know if that answers it, but think in terms of go back to that map. Where are the people coming from? And perhaps it's conversations with those administrators and things like that of saying, hey, we're gonna go after some better service. By the way, 20% of what we're doing today is coming from you. I don't know if...
Mr. Chairman, is this on?
It is.
Mr. Chairman, I really don't have much more to add than what Nick has already suggested. I think that air service is a community issue. Ownership of the airport may or may not directly be associated with the importance of air service throughout the community. I think the community as a whole needs to come together for air service. Who operates and maintains the airport may be a separate issue.
That almost gets us there. Still leaves a void, but we'll press on and see what other questions. Are there any other questions? Bob?
Mr. Chairman, I guess, that's a great presentation. I want to commend you for that. I feel like I went through my statistics class again. I had trouble with that. I have just a couple of questions here. I mean, I feel like I can barely absorb all that.
Yeah.
But have you done any specific studies, comparisons on reliability among carriers? That seems to be the biggest issue. I mean, you talked about us having the ability to get 60,000 people in this market going through this airport. And I would have to say our number one issue at this moment, and it might have been different in the past, but is reliability. And I see statistics on the internet about, you have a 1/3 chance or a 2/3 chance of getting on the plane this month or things like that. What are you doing anything specific to reliability?
As far as studies that we've done, no. What I can kind of tell you is not only the theory of air service in Wyoming, but air service, in general, is think of it more of being a marathon. You don't show up. Somebody doesn't show up and you pay them once and you help them for 6 months and it goes away and you just won the 100-yard dash. It's been a long process. It's been a long process over 10 years now. And I think we've done a pretty good job changing the perception of Wyoming as a state in terms of reliability. 10 years ago, there was a lot of challenge with that. If I fly out of Wyoming, I'm going to be late or I'm going to be canceled. Or every single community had concerns about that. All of the people that we talked to had concerns about that. Had similar stories that we've heard this morning on some of those kinds of things. And it's not specific to an individual carrier. It's specific to, in general, this program has allowed us to think about this and really focus on it a lot more. And I think by and large, as a state, that perception has gone away over the last 10 years. There are specific pockets in Riverton, certainly maybe one of them. But no, there hasn't been a study that says if this flight is, this late, then this is going to happen. You can see it. I mean, you see it's happening. And, the slide that I showed on Laramie, the point of that wasn't to say, look, their on-time performance and reliability improved, look at how well they did. Well, no, there were a lot of other factors that had to do with them doing better. The point was simply to say they were in a similar situation and they're in a different spot today. And there could have been many different paths they chose. But it did get better. And clearly your ability to fix that is going to directly correlate to how many people choose to fly out of Riverton or choose to fly into Riverton, just as important.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one other question I've got is, does anybody have any idea what impact the airport in Thermopolis is going to have on traffic in Riverton or Worland? And why the airport was even instituted there?
Mr. Chairman, with regard to impact, Thermopolis is not a commercial airport, so its impacts in terms of commercial service is going to be zero.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
So, from all the statistics and information, which was great, and I was here for the December presentation, so it helped to have been there for that. With the enhanced air service program, I'm assuming that that's still the program where you will help for several years until the airline gets on its feet, the boardings increase, and the message I'm getting is that so then the community has to at that point step up and if we can't make the boardings, then we've got to kick in the money. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, essentially yes. Let me talk about a couple of things. Each year, every community reapplies for what they're doing. Some communities elect to say, hey, we only want a 6-month contract because we want to get it in our budget cycle. Some communities say, hey, can we do a longer deal? But generally each year, the money has has been reallocated, if you will, or there's a new application that has to be filled out. The way that it specifically works is when the community goes and talks to carrier A and they come back and say, hey, we think it's going to cost us $2 million to fly to your airport and have us do what you want us to do. What happens then is that application is filled out. It's vetted by Sherry and Dennis and the aeronautics group and making sure that, does this make sense or not? Then it goes in front of the commission for a vote. That money, part of that process in that application is what financial component of that is the community going to pay? What's the percentage of the community is going to put forth? And it's been an ongoing process. So the first year you do it, Paul looks at all kinds of stats. Mr. Chairman, you guys look all kinds of things. The invoices come in. What's going on? How can we market? How can we promote it? It's really a community-driven thing. I mean, it's really a lot of people involved in it, but it's an annual process. And I don't know, Sherry, if you have a different way you want to speak to it, but
No,
that's kind of.
I appreciate that. So really, in all reality, I mean, we really this is a very long-term process of, kicking in money. This isn't just in a couple years. We've got to look down the road, and all the communities going to be able to sustain that? And I think what Dean was trying to say about the city of Riverton owning the airport, paying for the airport, they're tapped out at this point in time. So, I mean, for them the Riverton community to put in any more money for this project, to get another airline in here and pay for them for the next 10, 15 years, that's where we're at on the Riverton city part of things. So I don't know if everybody understands that. I just want to make sure the public knew that part of it. So this process of getting a new airline in is much more complicated than just getting another airline in here. Not that I'm opposed to it. I'm not. As a local travel agent, I deal with the cancellations. My passengers are disserviced. It's not just me. I deal with passengers daily that have been disserviced. I'm not liking it either. But the answer to the question is a lot more complicated than just getting another airline in here. And I think that's what the general public needs to be aware of. And there's many, many factors into this. So that I just wanted an explanation of how this whole enhanced program was going to work and when it ended and how we were all going to step up to the plate and continue this to pay the airline to come in here. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
There was a little tiny question at the beginning of is this a long-term project? And yes, but keep in mind the community and the surrounding communities that support the airport of people getting on airplanes. You can control that process a little bit.
Right.
If the community, and I speak because I've seen this happen in the state already. If you get together and you say, we want to go do this, we've put the money together, we've got money that we think we can support it for 2 years. Let's get the deal done. Let's push it give it to the aeronautics folks. They bless it. They say, go do it. And then what happens is the community goes, okay, we're done. Let's wait till next year. You can't do that.
Right.
All you're going to do is you're going to cut a check every month or every quarter to pay for it. You have to think more in terms of, okay, we've done this, but now we've got to invest more. We've got to invest in advertising.
Right.
We've got to invest in going to the high school basketball game and hanging a banner of the airline that just showed up. We've got to invest the time in being on the radio and being in the newspaper and promotional things, and you got to communicate it. In Wyoming, and it's not specific to Wyoming. Again, it's a marathon. It's a marathon not only to get this, but it's a marathon to train the person who doesn't use a computer, and they don't fly that often. They fly a couple times, and how do I get to them? How do I communicate to them that this exists and to support it? And to not drive to Denver, or don't drive to Salt Lake City. Fly here, because if you fly here, and your numbers go from 28,000 to 60, you're not going to owe anything. You won't. But we haven't seen that yet because it's a process, and it's a process that doesn't end. The easy part of this, sadly, is getting somebody to show up, and that in and of itself is hard. The harder process is once they're here, how can you as a community find ways to continue to support them and promote it and make sure the airplanes are full so you're not having to write a check at the end of the day.
Right.
There is a utopia of 60,000 boardings, and that sounds wonderful from 30,000 feet. The problem that I think we express is that, and it was on several of your slides, that the possibility of losing an existing carrier as you start this process is very real.
Yes.
And although we've had dismal performance, some performance is better than the zero performance that you're inclined to have, especially during the onboarding process. So if we today say, okay, let's move forward. In the past, we've had spits and spurts of excitement and people wanting to help with this process, and it always kind of peters out. So Riverton ends up continuing to hold that bag every time that enthusiasm goes away. So from that perspective is how we have to look at the situation, saying, yes, we can move things forward. But on the other hand, we also don't want to upset the carrier that we have now in lieu of spending $1, $2, $3 million, that only part of that is going to be covered by Wyoming Aeronautics in form of a grant, and then moving forward, we're left supporting $2 or $3 million or a goose egg. So we're trying to build that understanding, and some of the questions that you're getting from us are from a lot of different directions trying to culminate. So I think it's important that we do this in a delicate way, and that we look at all the options that are available to us, not, wahoo, we have this one time or 2 or 3 years worth of funds that might be available. Let's go ahead and do this. Meanwhile, we kick Great Lakes out and then end up with nothing 2 or 3 years from now or 6 months from now or next month. So I'm not sure how you would propose or recommend to us moving forward, but it's from our perspective, it's a very difficult challenge.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're absolutely correct, and it's my opinion from the beginning of Nick's presentation where he was saying this is really a community-driven decision, and all your points are very valid. As far as recommendations, I'm not sure I could make a recommendation for you one way or the other. However, as Nick pointed out at the beginning of his presentation, this is something that the community needs to discuss and move forward from there. And we're here to help in any way we can.
Perfect. And I think that's the point of the task force. And, you know, just in addition to the financial component, we have the reliability. We have the pilot shortage. We have mandatory retirement at age 65. We have the flight time restrictions. So there are a lot of things that are kind of coalescing to this point in helping us move forward. And we have a gentleman here. I will certainly call on him. I don't think it is, sir.
I have one more.
Feel free to.
Testing.
I can't test those red-green lights on anything because I don't see the difference. That's the reason why I didn't get into the Air Force Academy. Roger Bauer, Wyoming Business Council. My question is one, how's the program work from the state? And the second thing, I think that versus whether public pays for it or there's a public-private partnership, the programs that I'm aware of across the state, private businesses have stepped up with a huge amount of the funding. And I think that needs to be on the table because I'm not sure that our public would be willing to subsidize air industry all out of the taxpayer's dime for a few businesses. So that's really my question.
Good question.
Thank you, Roger. If we could get an answer to the question, then we'll move on to the next question.
Thank you. I might just give this, looks like she might have a question next. Mr. Chairman, just to answer the question, I think that how the program works is that there are obviously funds made available from the state legislature and the governor's office for communities to apply for this very thing. So the community would apply to the division would vet the application and then submit it to the Aeronautics Commission for approval or denial, depending on the commission's choice there. So it's usually, and this isn't always the case, but just using general terms, it's generally based on a year or some length of contract. And for that year, you get X number of round trips, X number of flights into a community. There is the state portion, and then there's the community portion. So talking a little bit, if we can, for just a minute, because I think it's important that we go into the budget here just a bit. our budget, we'd asked for some exception monies from the governor's office and the legislature this year. We got most of that. We were very fortunate and thankful to the legislature and the governor's office for supporting that. But that money was based kind of on existing communities, those existing communities being Cody, Rock Springs, Sheridan, and Jackson. Now, we do have some monies in the account that really aren't accounted for, not accounted for, but really aren't allocated. It's about approximately $2 million, and that's for the next biennium. Now, keep in mind that we know Sheridan is going to come and ask for money. They already have. There's an application, a pre-application already on Sherry's desk. So we know that there's an ask coming from Sheridan, which means that basically $2 million, some of that is already being asked for from Sheridan. So the remainder of it may still be available for Riverton. But again, that's all the monies that we have at this time. So let's take, for instance, and I'm using these numbers generically, so please understand that. But if we were to split the $2 million basically that are in the account now and give half of it to Sheridan and half of it to Riverton, that's all the monies that we have left for the remainder of the biennium, which means that there's no way we can guarantee any more assistance beyond that, at least in the short term. To get any more monies into the account, as many of you know, we would then have to go back and ask for a supplemental budget request. So the questions that Ms. Olson was asking and that Mr. Peranto were asking, they're very legitimate and need to be thought out in a very long-term perspective. The state can't guarantee that we'll have monies every year available for your communities. We can't. So the community has to understand, and I mean the greater community. All of those, Nick showed a map of, kind of the catchment area. So all of those communities that benefit from commercial air service in Riverton, those folks need to take a really long-term view as to how they best want to address this issue. You'd asked Sherry for some advice, and I think she was wise in suggesting that we really don't have a recommendation. This really is a community decision. Do you want to go to Great Lakes and try to improve the service you already have? Do you want to find other service? Those are the two questions you have. The only other alternative is to lose it entirely, which no one wants. So you're either looking at going back to Great Lakes or bringing in another carrier. You heard from Nick, if you bring in another carrier, it's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you every year for some time. Now, we see that there's plenty of leakage here within the community, so over time, will the amount that you owe or potentially have to contract with the airline go down? Probably, but there are no guarantees. It takes a significant marketing and promotion effort on behalf of the community to make sure that they're taking advantage of the leakage that exists within the community. So you heard it from Nick, you heard it from Charity. This is, it's not being understated here when they say that the community has to get involved and stay involved long term. They have to.
If I can ask a question about that, we talk about involving the community and businesses, and we've talked about potentially some of the gas and oil companies contributing. What argument can you go to Marathon and Conoco with and say, hey, Conoco, we'd like you to contribute, because we're talking millions here. We're not talking a couple $100,000. What argument do you use when you go to Conoco or one of these companies and say, we'd like you to contribute $100,000 into this program? Because realistically, you're looking at fairly large contributions, because $5,000, $6,000, $20,000 may not really get us to the point where we need to be. So there's got to be a way in there as a business person. You say, well, for $100,000, why would I contribute that when for $20,000 I can go and buy a bus and shuttle my own people or just move people to Riverton? How do you get that buy-in for this community from those businesses? And I know Stephanie's raised her hand a couple times, and we'll get to you in just a second, but how have you gotten that buy-in from the other businesses in the community to help support the airport?
That's a good question. Businesses are all about the bottom line. We know that, right? And so if they're having to spend more money in shuttling their employees to a community outside of yours to fly them in and out, then obviously they're going to want to invest in better air service. Better air service to them is just as important as it is to you folks. Now, obviously there's a break even, correct? they're, as you mentioned, they're not going to spend $100,000 to get a $20,000 benefit. But I'm not sure that that's, the actual numbers that we're talking
I was just
about. I
pulling
know it
them
was used as an
arbitrarily.
example, but I think the first thing you have to do is you have to sit down and talk to them and say, we know it's important to you folks. We know it's important to you folks to have good quality air service. Here's what we're planning to do. How much are you willing to help? I think another suggestion I would have for this community is to contact some of the task forces in the other communities around the state, Cody, Gillette, Sheridan, Jackson, and get their input on how they approached businesses and what was the discussion they had with their business folks to get them to contribute.
Thank you, sir. Stephanie, would you like to?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Stephanie Kessler with the Fremont County Commission. I just wanted to, add a perspective that this is all being framed as if everyone in the community of Fremont County is putting this problem at your doorstep, and we don't want to do that. I think there's a consensus out there that the city of Riverton is doing a great job in the operation and maintenance of the airport facility. But air service is a different, broader issue, and no one is trying to imply that we want you to solve this problem solely and to take on the financial risk of that. That's why I thought last week we had a much broader based task force appointed to move forward with this, and we want to be empowered to do that so that you are not feeling that it is just the city of Riverton having to tackle this. I think there's a lot of people in this community with the vision to jump right on top of this, that there's a lot of united sentiment in this county to get it done. There's vision that we can do this and we can do better than what we have now. And so my request is expedite the work of the people who have already had the conversations, like with Cody or Jackson. I know a number of other people here. We're ready to jump on this. We've already asked the questions. Some of us have identified what the hurdles are. We're already thinking about the private-public partnerships that we need. Empower us to start talking with the Wyoming aeronautics folks that are here today right now so we can move. I think we can get tied up in a lot of larger national issues that seem overwhelming. We can't address those, but we can step up with a can-do attitude and make things better, just like other communities around this state have already done. There's no reason why we can't as well, and they have met and come up with solutions to their problems. I know we in Fremont County can do the same thing. So I think we should move forward with a can-do attitude, put ourselves in the driver's seat, and work with the good people of the state of Wyoming to make this happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Kessler. It's important to note, too, that the mayor has already worked towards creating that task force, and I believe that you're already on that and a part of that task force. And one of the actions that we have later in this meeting is to actually appoint that task force to empower the task force to move forward. But it needs to be done in a way that works through the city of Riverton and through the airport board as well. So that'll happen here shortly. All right, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Missy White. I'm a member of LEDA, and I wanted to add some clarity to the conversation that's happening, so thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. So both LEDA and IDEA Inc. have agreed to be co-sponsors and work cooperatively with the Wyoming Aeronautics Board in both sponsoring the grant application. We also recognize that it's a long-term commitment for not just the short-term air service question, but for years to come in all the things that have been mentioned, continuing to support the air service. And we certainly understand that part of that sponsoring obligation is to have the relationships with the broader community and the public-private partnerships to be able to provide the funding for the revenue guarantees. We're very cognizant of that. We're excited about moving forward. Largely, well, for a number of reasons, including, as all of us have mentioned and heard here in the room, that unreliable air service essentially functions as no air service. And considering that in February, we averaged 45% cancellations with Great Lakes. Currently for March, we're pushing 60% cancellations. This is essentially the same as not having air service, and it is an enormous economic factor. We've already had individuals and businesses leave, and we recognize our current air service troubles are preventing companies from moving into our community, and all of our communities need that. So we recognize that although it's maybe a little atypical that the airport is owned by the city of Riverton, the air service is a community-wide issue. And we also want to make sure that we split out the issues of what the Riverton Airport Board is doing in terms of operations is great. We've got a wonderful airport. We have this setup in the infrastructure. What we need is this other side of air service to be able to provide the needed air service consistency and quality for the Fremont area residents and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. You had one other thing?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the Aeronautics Commission to elaborate a little bit on the people who, like LIDA or IDEA, are these all 50, are these all tax exempt or private groups that apply for these funds? What's the process? Dennis, maybe you can answer that.
Sure. They're not all nonprofit. Sweetwater County is the signatory on one. Gillette Campbell County is a signatory on that there, on their minimum revenue guarantees there. But there are a number of nonprofits. Cody's a good example. Jackson's another good example. So it kind of spans a myriad of opportunities there. I think from what I'm hearing, you have something that other communities only wish they had in terms of a task force that is represented by a number of appropriate people in the community to be serving the communities in terms of air service. I think you guys have what you need, at least initially, from what I'm seeing based on this discussion today. So I think whether it's a nonprofit or one of the governmental entities that wants to apply, either of those are acceptable from our perspective. But you have a task force in place. My recommendation is you utilize them.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, and I think it's important we have appropriate representation, as the mayor's pointed out, on that task force, so. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Can I say one thing, Mr. Chairman? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
For what it's worth, I'm the longest serving member on this board. I remember when we first put in the air enhancement program, we asked for either 400,000 or 600,000 for Great Lakes to increase the size of the 1900 to the Embraer. And we used it for, I think, 1 or maybe 2 years at the most. We originally thought that program was seed money from the state, so we could try it, and if it worked fine, continue on with it, but without any subsidy. Nowadays, everybody seems to see that as a continuing funding source. Am I correct or not incorrect when I say that?
Mr. Chairman, that's a tough question. I wasn't here when Riverton first applied, but I think you need to seriously consider the presentation that Nick gave. What was in 2004 is no longer in 2014.
Yeah.
So the real question is, and I'm just going to be blunt so that, I want to be as black and white and clear as I possibly can. If you want good, adequate air service, you're going to pay for it. That's the reality that we are living in today. None of us like it. None of us want it to be that way. But until something changes, that's the reality you're facing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, essentially, the last few years I wondered what happened to the seed money when Cody, I think, had 7 or 8 years running with continuous funding. And I thought that was the original intent. Well, whatever the intent is now is considerably different than it was in 2004. So, yes, Roger.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mattson, I can actually answer that. At that time, the air enhancement program started out with the Business Council, and so I think after 2 years, it was given back to aeronautics to manage.
Yeah, okay.
And that was a legislative direction.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Gard?
Mr. Chairman, I think Mrs. Tinable is trying to get the floor a couple times. Does she have something to add to the conversation?
Well, good. Go ahead, Rich. Well,
Do you have something to add to the conversation? You've been up and down and we've missed you. Would you like to add to us?
Take care of it.
I was just going to say that I understand the money point, but I believe in Riverton. I believe in the community. The money that they're spending to drive to either Denver, Salt Lake, Billings, they're not liking that, and they would just rather fly out of here. And so there is a huge community support, and I've seen that. I've worked up there for 3 years, and I just, please, believe in Riverton and the other communities and other counties around here, because until the changes of everything with the flight, you know, and the pilots and things, we did have reliability. So Riverton, the community, I think it's a great community, and they will support it.
great.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to have answered. Had a long phone call conversation last evening. What is the process of putting out bids for carriers? Could anybody describe that to us?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can you state the question again?
If we were to try to put out a questionnaire or an opportunity for different companies to make presentations to fly into Riverton, would that be a possibility?
Mr. Chairman, I think the best way to answer this is to go back to something that I said earlier, and I think it's a community decision to sit down and talk about what do you want.
Well, but I understand it, and I do believe that the citizenry of Fremont County wants to look at improved air carrier. And I want to know what the process is. If we go out and ask for applications, are we going to get any, in your opinion? Are we going to get 3 applications? Are we going to get the Great Lakes that we have? I would like to know, you just put Laramie on, and so did Laramie only come on with one supplier from SkyWest? Was there anybody else in the wings that wanted to try to help Laramie out?
Laramie was a little bit of a different.
Always is.
Because they're part of the Essential Air Service program. There's 3 communities in the state that are Laramie, Worland, and Cody. As far as putting out an application per se, you know, really it boils down to you guys having a conversation saying, you know what, we want to have, maybe there's a company here that we don't know of that has 100 people every day that goes to Minneapolis. Simply don't know that. But maybe the decision is, you know what, our number one focus is we want Delta Airlines here to serve Minneapolis. Or our number one focus is we want to find a carrier that can serve, similar to what Casper has done with Allegiant to Vegas. We want the same thing. It's a matter of determining what you want. I think some of those things are contacts that we can help you facilitate with in terms of who's the right guy to call, who's the right person to start the conversation with.
See, that's my question. I think we beat this horse to death. I want to know the different people that would be interested in servicing Riverton's airport.
Okay.
And maybe you don't have that information, and maybe we need to directly contact all of those individually ourselves. There isn't a process of putting it out to bid. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, that's correct. What we can do is we can help you facilitate the introductions and and find out if the service that you want is even feasible. We can give you contacts with the carriers.
So our task force, probably the very first thing we ought to find out is who is interested and who is not.
Correct. And also
what is their
decide
level
exactly.
of interest,
Yes.
right?
And
Once
and
we determine if they would come to Riverton for 500,000 or if they're just not interested, is the 200 is the big gorilla in the room, correct?
well, what you would want to do is first figure out as a community, like Nick was saying, exactly what you want, and then we can, through our experience, try and match you up with a carrier that could provide that, and then start the conversation. Just let me clarify for the grant itself. If you take an arbitrary number of whatever airline you would attract, let's say they needed $1 million to come into Riverton. What that breaks down to be is that the state can support 72%, and the community would have to come up with 28% of that, and that's at a minimum. I just wanted to make that clear. Did I answer your question?
The local entity would be on the hook for 28%?
28% minimum, correct?
Plus whatever over $1 million.
Yeah, that's just an arbitrary number that I was using to try and explain it.
Doesn't the state already work with SkyWest? Or
We
have
do.
relationships with SkyWest?
We do have a
So
relationship
the
with SkyWest.
presentation that you would bring isn't really several airlines, it would be SkyWest.
Mr. Chairman, we actually actively work with United, Delta, SkyWest, American, Frontier, everybody. One thing I do want to clarify, typically when we have gone to contract with a carrier, the maximum number that either the state or the community owes is a known number. It's not $1 million and, oh, by the way, sorry, we missed our targets. It's actually 1.5 million. That doesn't happen. It's a known number in a contract that's signed. To echo Sherry's point, the 28% is the minimum. Each community does things a little bit differently. Cody's is higher, Gillette's is higher, Jackson's is higher. Those are minimum numbers, and each contract is entirely different and separate from the next one. So,
Before I let you go, Mr. Chairman, do I still have
You bet, yes, sir.
time? My next question is, when we would be wise businessmen to go out and find who was interested in our service area, right?
yes.
And try to get some numbers of, maybe somebody would come in for what we're doing right now and give us better service. So we'd be wise to find that out, and if there were people. Also, on the other side of that, if there wasn't anybody that was terribly interested in coming to Riverton, we'd know that too. Correct. And then the other thing, is there any hope on the horizon? Have you seen anything that we might be able to change the bad rules that have been put in place? Or are they just going to stay forever?
Forever is an unknown answer. There's
But I don't want to beat that to death.
there's
Do we
nothing
need to
that we've seen on
contact
the
our
horizon
senators,
that
or
suggests that's
there's
changing.
no way that we can influence that? So we're going to live with those. So we might as well get used to that and quit complaining about the number of hours for pilots and get off that conversation. And so with that done, the group should really concentrate on what the cost is to bring in different carriers or enhance. Now that's another question. Have you ever seen anything where we said to Great Lakes that we will stifle your pay if you're on time at 90% on time? We'll enhance your bonus from the Fremont County of $300,000, $500,000. Is there anything that works like that?
We've actually had communities ask that question. I don't know that anybody's actually ever approached Great Lakes, to my knowledge.
I did.
With
I did
that.
yesterday. I spoke with Chuck Howell yesterday, and I said, Mr. Howell, we're having this issue, as you know, and I said, if Riverton and the community were to provide some sort of stipend or additional funds, would that help? And he said, well, Dean, for the first time in my life in this industry, this is not a money problem, it's an HR problem. So and we distributed a document from Great Lakes this morning that I got from Mr. Howell yesterday late in the day, talking about some of the things that they're doing as a company to fill the void of pilots, and that's flying the 9-seat Beech 1900s, some of those things just to build time. So, you know, it kind of comes back, and I see where Councilman Guard is going with the question, but it kind of comes back to we can spend a lot of time, energy, and money. Say life is great and we get another airline in here. How do we see what their reliability is going to be? I mean, you know, looking at SkyWest and some of the issues that they have currently in other markets, you know, with their pilot problems, how do we make this any better by moving to another airline? You know, I look at the Brasilia. Talk about service and reliability of the Brasilia. The Brasilia is not the most reliable aircraft out there. So we have inherent reliability issues. How many extra airplanes do they have sitting on the ground wherever to fill that void? Those are the types of questions that I think it's important to ask as we move this process forward. And I don't know, maybe you guys can speak to that as far as other communities and what their reliabilities looked at. One of the other challenges we have, as Paul's pointed out, is in 2015, we're looking at having some substantial reconstruction done at our airport. The only aircraft capable of flying in and out of here is the Beech 1900 during that process, which is going to be how many months?
April through September, October.
So SkyWest doesn't fly the Beech 1900 that I'm aware of. So during that time, what are we going to do for air service? So there are a lot of things to this that the task force that's been assembled may or may not know, that we need to have a larger base of people a part of. You know, you don't want things to get unwieldy, but we have to have a lot of the people involved in that process that have this information so that we can make the right decisions, not just for Riverton, but for the community as well. I mean, we've all established that we have a problem. We've all established that we need a solution. And I think the primary reason for having Nick, you here, and Wyoming Aeronautics is to get some input on how to move things forward. It's not a new issue, and it's one that this board's been struggling with for, well, years, off and on, as we go through the peaks and valleys of service. When I look at what Great Lakes has done, and some of the things that they're doing proactively to move forward, I know that there are some relationship issues with Wyoming Aeronautics and Great Lakes. They have certainly not taken, Great Lakes has certainly not taken, or appear to have not, I can't speak for them, but appear to have not taken steps like some of the grandfather clauses and some of those other waivers that they could have done for whatever reason, and I can't speak for them as an airline, but looking at them, you know, we have kind of a bad and a maybe. And when we look at that from this point of view, it's really a challenge, because there are so many other bits, parts, and pieces: the aircraft, the reliability of the airplanes, our airport closure. We look at, you know, bringing jets into Riverton, when they're all jets, but CRJs, for instance, into Riverton, and what kind of additional security that requires, and additional resources from the airports. So as much as we'd like to separate operations from service, they're they're friendly neighbors, and they have to touch and they have to intertwine. So I think to come back to your point, Councilman Guard, is we do need to look at all the airlines and give everybody an opportunity, because SkyWest may not be the best option, and Great Lakes may not be the worst option.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to say I enjoyed Member Steen's comment regarding mixing Alzheimer's with Tourette's. I can certainly relate to that, and I'd just like to comment that your presentation was excellent again this morning. Mr. Wrangler, the information wasn't a whole lot better. It's still kind of dismal, but it's a reality that we have to deal with. I would like to thank Commissioner Allen and Kessler, Mr. Allen, for suggesting that we get a task force together. I thought that was an excellent idea, and we're now forming that. Stephanie's remarks, I think, regarding our community are right on point. I think we all want to work together and make it work, and I think it's certainly possible for us to do that. From the city's perspective, we just want to make sure that it's something that's viable on into the future. It's not just a quick fix right now, and then after it's fixed, everybody walks away, and the city of Riverton is still left holding the bag. So we want to make sure that whatever the task force puts together is a long-term fix that's in the best interest of our entire county, and we recognize that the airport that happens to be in Riverton is a county asset, and it's something that we all need to share in that responsibility. And I would just like to encourage the task force that we're putting together to, the first thing on their agenda is to form a meeting as soon as possible and to see which direction we want to go. I think Councilman Guard hit the nail on the head when he said that we've beat this horse to death, that we have a problem. And these experts that are here don't have the solution. It's our solution that we have to find it. And so we just need to roll up our sleeves, get to work, and get it done. So that would be my comment at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Kaminga?
So I guess, Nick, just to kind of wrap up a lot of what you said, we're in a position where we're using diminished aircraft because they don't make them anymore. And so if we build our boardings up to the 50-seat level, we're going to have a more reliable carrier, more or less. I mean, that's the idea. I mean, the whole idea behind this commission and task force is to figure out if we want to increase boardings in Riverton. If we want to do that, there could be a point where we reach the need for a regional jet, a 50-passenger, which could then enhance our reliability and of course build in our community. I guess this is the way I'm taking what all's been said today. These are suggestions you've made kind of through your presentation, and we're to follow up on that more or less, right?
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that the type of airplane is necessarily the driving factor in the operational performance of it.
Well,
yes, they're getting older, no question.
Yeah.
I don't remember who told me this or if I read it somewhere. Just because you have a 1956 Chevy doesn't mean it drives any different today. It just costs more to fix it. It's not that the same thing holds true with the Brazilias in the 1900s. It's not that they're more unsafe today than they were 10 years ago, and that's not at all true. No. They just cost more. What you're getting with a jet is an airplane that's going to cost more to fix because it's a jet. So one doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the other, but at some point in time, what's going to happen is the cost of maintaining a Brasilia, or the cost of maintaining a 1900, or even the cost of maintaining a 50-seat CRJ is going to get prohibitive, where the airlines aren't going to want to deal with them anymore, and they're going to park them in the desert.
Right, and that if the market here in Riverton is not large enough to support that aircraft, to be whatever it is, then there's still the chance that you're going to lose the air service.
Sure, possibly.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask one question. I've always wanted an answer to this, but I don't know if I've ever had one. Cody, Wyoming is a essential air service carrier. They have twice the boardings we have. They also have 2 regional jets per day. How in the heck do they end up in essential air service? I've never understood that.
I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version to this. Once upon a time, and I don't remember the number, I think there were 7 communities in the state that were EAS, 6 communities. Well, what happened with Cody is Cody years ago had similar conversations of what we're having today of we've got to fix their air service. I think it was in 2003, 4, 5, somewhere in there, where for a period they lost air service entirely. They applied for a grant. They ended up getting supporting service to both Denver and Salt Lake. What happened over as recent as the last 2 or 3 years was, the state historically supported United Airlines service in the winter from the 1st of October to the 31st of May. June, July, August, September, United said, you know what, we do fine here. we're making money. We don't need to help, but we need help in the winter when that's when we need it, when the tourism goes away. What happened was, I believe it was SkyWest who said, you know what, we're having struggles in the winter too. So we're simply going to file notice with the DOT that we're leaving. And when they did that, it triggered Cody to become an EAS market again, because it needed to have at least a minimum of 2 flights a day. So SkyWest filed, the DOT said, no, you can't leave. They put it out for bid. SkyWest put in, their bid was, we want support from October through May, because that's where we're struggling as well for Salt Lake City. Now, historically, what the community has is they have increased capacity in the summer because of the high influx of tourism associated with the park, which is why they're getting Chicago service this year. As part of the discussion that the community had with the DOT when they were awarded their latest DOT award came out 2-3 weeks ago, where where United is the DOT is paying United in the winter, and they're paying SkyWest to Salt Lake as well. But what it doesn't preclude is it doesn't preclude them to find Chicago service in the summer as well. And United said, well, yeah, we feel that it's a viable option because we know how well we do in the summer, and we know how many people are coming out of Europe and Asia and everything else that will probably connect on that. So call it dumb luck that they ended up, where they did. I mean, it just, one of the things that over time sort of transpired and happened.
I thought it was very interesting. They double our boardings and get money from the feds. I just didn't understand that. I still don't.
Thank you, guys. Okay. Anybody else have anything? Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Kate Mastis.
I'm Kate Mastis. I'm here representing the city of Lander today. I'm also the president of LEDA over in Lander, which is the Lander Economic Development Association. A couple of things I want to bring up, just want to make sure they're on the table. Want to make sure that we're all clear that every community in the county has their own airport. There's a reason that most of the organizations don't want to pony up to funding the operation in Riverton, and it's because we pour our general dollars into the Lander Airport, which is one of the busiest GA airports in the state. Shoshone, Du Bois, everyone has their GA airport that their city funds go to. That doesn't mean we're not interested in participating in the Riverton Airport, but what it means is we have to discern where those dollars go and for what reason. GA operations aren't where we see a potential for overlap, but operations are, or service is. I was definitely concerned by Board Member Olson's statements that Riverton does not have an interest in or ability to pony up any dollars for service, because it's going to be a group effort, and if Riverton's not on the table, it's sure going to be hard to get Lander on board. I obviously can't speak for the council. I'm one member of the council, but I would have a hard time going back and asking Lander to come up with $150,000 or more, with the understanding that Riverton's not putting any into the kitty. So I also know that Ms. Olson doesn't speak for the council, and they'll make their decision themselves as well. So I take that with what it was. Most of the successes that we heard today from Nick's presentation with Jackson and with Cody have had a dual effort. They have their operations effort that maintains the facilities, maintains what they do, and then they have a separate service group. So one of the concerns I had earlier, spoke with Mayor Warpness about the proposed task force, how it was formed, and with the intent going forward. Again, we want to make sure that that's a service conversation, not an operations conversation, because that's just not where I think we're comfortable playing. The other concern I've had with the task force from the beginning and its current makeup is everyone says they want it's a county airport, it's a county airport. We need to get the county involved until it's time to form the task force. And you put dual Riverton chairman on it, you put your airport board member on it, and one person from each of the additional communities. That says, here, come help us out, not this is a joint effort. So I do have a concern about that. I know I also tend to be a bold personality, so I understand, but Chairman Pronto does is a conversation starter as well. So I think there are some concerns with having it be dominant from one group or another. I'm not saying we want majority representation, because we don't. So let me clear that up. I also walked away from our task force meeting last week with some concerns about the construction that's going to happen next year. With the 1900 being the only aircraft currently in the schedule to be able to fly out, sure limits our opportunities for competitive air service, because there's only half of an airline flying that right now. So I spoke with Cheryl down at YDOT just to see what their understanding was on it. My understanding, and I think Paul will know a lot more about this than I do because I know very little, but the understanding is that that's how it was designed for the construction, because that's what there is now. However, there is the potential to review that construction plan and make it possible for a Brasilia or a CRJ. Your consultant for the engineering portion of the program would have to review it, but without her making any official statement, because this was all just a hallway conversation, so to speak, she did think there was some potential, and that should not be a limiting factor on deciding if we pursue a new service or not. Right now, I think Riverton, the city of Riverton, has been presented with a gift from the county, and that gift is outrage, and that outrage is towards the current air service. I know there's a lot of mixed feelings on it, and this will probably not go well in Ernie's story, but to me, we don't have air service. Riverton Airport does not exist for my company. My company spends more time on me driving somewhere else, but they would also, and they would put that into ticket price. You know, I would spend $200 more to be able to fly out of Riverton Airport than Casper Airport. That's my magic dollar figure. I'd spend $200 more, but I got to know I can get there. There's not a chance I'm trusting Riverton. So it doesn't exist to me, hasn't for years. And you could hear stories of that all day. We could probably have everyone in the room stand up today and tell a story about why it's not working for them. So I'm not going to get into that. But with this opportunity, as we spoke last week at the kind of that informal meeting, which Commissioner Kessler called, not me, just for clarification, is that the idea of who would sponsor this air service enhancement grant. We spoke, had some guidance. Representative Larson had some input on whether it should be the airport board and what that would look like, and some of the risks involved with that, whether it should be one of the government organizations. And we threw out the potential of the two EDOs through the two major communities in the region, co-sponsoring and jointly sponsoring. As Missy said, both those votes were held this week. I know with Lita it was unanimous. It's something that we see, and we understand what that involves. We understand that involves fundraising. We understand that involves going out to these businesses. Knowles obviously has a vested interest in this. That's why they're sitting in the room today, and it's going out to these people and saying, what's it costing you, and what would it take for you to help us out on this? We've already had hallway conversations with the city of Lander, and we're going to put it on a work session, and we're willing to at least discuss putting hard dollars up to match this air service. But there's some limitations to that, and some of those limitations are we don't want to feel like the little kid at the table. We want to have a stake in the game. We want to have honest conversations. We want to be able to bear some of the back ugly side of everything. But we do want to have these conversations and be part of them. So with that, I know you're getting ready to set this task force. This task force has always been kind of a big piece off to the side. It was kind of dropped on the communities and say, we want you to help us, and here's how you're going to help us. To me, that's not how you build consensus. That's not how you move forward. I have been asked by Mayor Wolf to participate on that, and I put my name in, and I'm willing to do so. I still think we need to consider, is that the right venue? Is that the right way to move forward? Especially considering you have a sponsoring organization willing to do the lion's share of the work. No one can go out and, we're going to need resolutions from all the city. Everyone's going to have to vote on this. Everyone's going to have to be part of it. Nothing can just be dropped on anybody. But it can't be an unwieldy group either. It needs to be people, and I'm not saying that the 5 people that are on the ad hoc are the right 5. I'm not saying 5 is the right number, but I think we need to look at what's right, not what we've already continued down the road of, so let's do that anyway. So that's all I have to say for now.
Mr. Mastis, thank you. And I think, not to speak for Ms. Olson, but the burden of the Riverton Airport isn't really the same as the burden of the Lander Airport, which is quite a bit smaller, doesn't support commercial services, doesn't have the ARF requirements, the police presence. There are a lot of things that go into having a commercial airport, so that comparison doesn't draw as well. Shoshone has a grass field. I mean, obviously their costs are going to be quite a bit lower. So that comparison doesn't really work. So, you know, part of the problem that I have is when you start looking at a task force, it has to be a fairly equal representation, and Riverton does have is a stakeholder of that. And the last thing I think this board wants to do is make this a Riverton versus Lander thing, because that's really counterproductive. However, you're right, there should be some equal representation. But when you look at it, you have to say, and maybe this is guidance from Wyoming Aeronautics, and we've spoken to some of the other task forces around the state as well, but when you look at how that community involvement grows, it grows from a kind of a grassroots, like you're saying. I think in many ways, we've all had those conversations that you've had, and you've shaken the tree a little bit more over on the Lander side, and the tree's been shaken here in Riverton as well. But we need to kind of come together and coalesce for the greater good, not necessarily the control. I think part of the issue that we're still struggling with is that it is still a Riverton board, and the Riverton City Council would have to separate that service from the operations. And then, of course, you have to look at what goes into operations as part of the contribution of the service, because that's a fairly large percentage of contribution that the citizenry of Riverton is supporting. So we have a lot of things to work out, and I don't know that we have any easy answers right now, but the formation of a task force should be with the intent that it will grow and shrink and move, and different people as an organization, they should say, you know, we really need to get the casino folks involved. And, you know, I know the mayor has already put that information out there. It's tough to target individual people. You say that, you know, it's dropped on the communities. I think it was more of a reaching out than a dropping on any community. So, you know, we have to be careful with our vernacular as well, because it's a bit abrasive when you say the mayor dropped this letter on communities saying, come help us, as opposed to come be a bigger part of this. So we really have to be careful in how we move this forward and make it a community effort, not a specific group or specific person trying to push an agenda. Everybody needs a say. And if this is truly going to be a community thing, if you invite an organization or a community, and I'll use Du Bois as an example, I mean, not for any negative reason, but if Du Bois decides they don't want to be a part of the task force, or they can only contribute a small amount, then that's a function of the task force, not necessarily us up here. What we're looking for is input from the task force as a committee, or as a task force that's a subcommittee of the airport board, so that we still have to run things through the city council. Now, this particular body is, the decisions we make are as an advisory to the city council. So we have a lot of different entities that we're working through here, and maybe it is a little bit stacked in the mayor's current list towards Riverton and having the chairman. I really think that was initially just to get that ball rolling. Who becomes the chairman of that, it doesn't really matter. That's a function of the task force. The task force should come up with a name, come up with their chairman, determine who their members are. All of that can be decided by the task force. I think the mayor's intent, not to speak for the mayor, but the mayor's intent was to get it going. Somebody has to be essentially ahead of that body until things get moving. And I think the intent of having Mr. Weaver and Mr. Griffin essentially have one vote, they would be kind of a co-person for the city, not necessarily two separate people, was because obviously Paul brings a lot of important information as far as the operations of the airport go as the airport manager, and Mr. Weaver brings a lot of information as far as the financial components of the city, and it's appropriate that he be a part of that as well. Lander is well represented on the board. I know that Ms. Kessler speaks for the county, but also as a resident of Lander. That's a Lander perspective as well. And Ms. White is also from Lander, and yourself are from Lander. So right now, we also have Phil Christofferson from Leeds on that ad hoc as well. So the intent, I think, that the mayor was looking to move forward was to have those 5 people, the current ad hoc, grow into what the mayor had looked to put together to garner that community support. If Hudson wants to be a part of it, if Shoshone wants to be a part of it, if individual community members, I see Mike Bailey behind you, if he wants to be an advocate and really support this program, well, then he should have a voice as well. I think that we're looking for contribution, not necessarily control. So as we move this forward, and I can talk all day, and the one thing I find over years is that people will never shut the chairman up, even though he should. But, sorry, everybody entertains me, and I appreciate that. But I think it's important that we work together as a community, not bring our control and necessarily wear the badge of Lander or wear the badge of Riverton on our shirt, but come together as a community and do this. The one thing that this board has to do, and the city of Riverton and this community has to do, is make sure that this propagates, that this isn't just a one-time deal. Everybody gets tired of supporting the airport and they move on, and then we're kind of left with nothing. Because as the presentation that Nick gave us, I mean, the very real possibility is that we have no air service. And when you look at it from a dollars and cents, geez, we're awfully close to Casper, guys. You know, so we have to think about this and say 117 miles to Casper really isn't that bad of a drive, and it's a lovely drive. We all have made an awful lot here lately. So we have to fight for this. This has to be something we want to bring here, and it's not something we can sit back and just kind of watch go by.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Aren't we on item 7? Looks like we're on item 7 to me. Task force appointment.
I think we have Mr. Bailey. Sorry, I pointed you out, sir.
You pointed me out, so it's your fault. But Mr.
Usually
Chairman
is.
and board members, as a member of the business community here in Riverton, Lander, Du Bois, all the county, again, I do a lot of flying in and out. I have a lot of consultants and other business people that are flying in and out. And so again, it's very important to us to keep the Riverton Airport viable and have good, reliable service. And like Cade said, you know, we're willing to pay more to fly out of Riverton than we are for Casper, for example, because the cost, time, mileage, whatever, again, a couple $100 is probably an underestimate of what it costs to really go there. If you have a 6 o'clock a.m. flight, you got to go down and stay the night ahead unless you want to leave at 3 o'clock in the morning here. And so it's vital. And I think I like to be a glass is half full kind of guy. And I think we have a huge opportunity here to where in the past, sometimes we haven't been able to get all the communities to jump in and really support the airport in some ways, that I think we're all feeling that pinch of what the non-reliable air service can do. And in the past, I've flown a lot, and I've really never had any major issues with Great Lakes. So, I mean, I'm not going to throw them under the bus and say this is all their fault. But here recently, again, since the pilot rules took effect and some of that, it has gone downhill greatly. So I think it's worth our while, and I think all of us as a community are feeling it, and I think we have an opportunity for everybody to say, hey, this really is important. It's pinching. Our constituents are talking to us about it. It's important. So we all need to pony up, and that's the business community, the governmental entities, the economic development entities, all need to pitch in, and I think all together we can make this thing really work. And I would be just happy as a clam if we could get Riverton to 60,000 people. That would be fantastic. And get a flight to Salt Lake or some other major hub so we had a choice. And I think the competition in the market would make us all extremely happy, both price-wise and reliability-wise. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The things I see here, the task force is really set up to give us as a board some guidance as to where the community wants to go with the airport service. We know that Riverton will take care of the airport operations, but like the chairman has said, there's some overlap there, because as our air service increases, our demands for air operations, i.e., security and baggage handling and rescue trucks and all that stuff, that's all gonna go up too. So the two do interrelate. And yeah, we handle as a board more the operations part than the service part. The community wants the service, but so do we. But we also have to be relevant in our view of what kind of cost of operations is going to increase as we increase service. I mean, if we're running a regional jet in here, 2 times a day or whatever, the FAA is going to require us to have more stuff. So that's operations. So we're not here to try and govern or rule the task force. We're here to ask the task force to give us some suggestions as to how to improve what we have, and the task force should be equipped to generate the local community funds to go along with what the state's going to give us. So,
if I may. So I guess my point to that would be, I agree. They absolutely have to work together.
Yeah.
However, I do not believe that the task force as a subcommittee of the Riverton Airport Board is appropriate.
Oh.
I believe that they should be partnership ventures working towards a common goal of improved air service in Riverton, in Fremont County, with the Riverton Airport Board managing primarily operations, the task force of whatever makeup managing service, like it is in many other communities. Obviously, there has to be a partnership, because if we negotiate, if that group, and I may not even be on it, so let's say the service group negotiates for a CRJ 700 instead of a 200, 70 seater. Well, we know through the airport conversation last week, operations-wise, that the fire truck that you guys have at the airport right now would not accommodate that, and it wouldn't be allowed. So obviously, to say that either group can operate in a vacuum is would be just a non-point, because they couldn't. But are we serious about air service in Riverton? That's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
How serious are we, and how much do we want to do it as a group? How much do we want to do it as a team? And I go back, I'll say it again, there is a golden opportunity on the table right now. Too many companies like mine and like Ms. Bennett, who had to leave, or Becker, I mean, people are writing it off, and that, there's a very real potential that by the end of this year, instead of trying to raise whatever the matching funds are, you're going to have to come up with $750,000 more for operations, and then figure out air service to try and get that money back. So we're at a tipping point. There is absolute passion. There's passion far beyond me. I'm loudest. My middle initial is A, and that stands for abrasive. So I apologize for that. But there are a lot of passionate people in all the communities. I mean, there's a reason Du Bois wants to participate, because driving up over Togety isn't fun in the winter. And Shoshone, yeah, they're not that far away. They want to participate too. And while it would be great if everyone could come together and call this Fremont County Airport and start splitting the costs down the middle, I would recommend that that's not a bone that you get in your teeth at this point. I think there's an opportunity to work together on service, and then let's see where we go from there. If this eventually becomes a county airport and there's joint support throughout, great, but I don't want to muddle the conversations, because I think it's a losing proposition for the opportunity that we have in front of us.
but then are you saying you would like to see the task force advise the city council directly? Or,
I think they'd like to not advise the city of Riverton or have that be a part of the involvement at all.
Yeah, that is not what I said.
that's what I'm trying to understand. I mean,
Is that what you're
because the city owns the airport, there has to be some directive to the city council, whether it goes through us or it goes right to them.
And I would see that as a subject of the councils in general. And the proper vehicle for that, I don't know. One vehicle that's been discussed is possibly as a subcommittee of FCAG. Because
Would you explain
Fremont
that?
County Association of Governments. So there's an association of governments that exists within the community that all of our leadership have seats at the table on. And it is a countywide organization that has countywide interests in mind. And if we're able to do some, start thinking of it as countywide, then maybe we should at least maybe look at some of it as countywide. And that does take some egos and some territorialism out of the picture, because there's some potential. I have not reviewed that with FCAG or any of the members. It was just a thought of neutral territory, because that's kind of what it's after. And there isn't a person on the task force I don't think belongs there. And the task force could be 50 people, and they would all have a justifiable seat at the table. I don't know how many people have been. I mean, there's a reason yours is a group of 5, and the reason councils are 7 or 8 people. It's because as soon as you start getting 15, 20 people around a table, half the time it degenerates into stories of that one time I got diverted to Rock Springs and had to walk home, and the other half it's I love this, and nothing gets done. So a small, nimble task force, whether that's 5, 7, 9, 12, what the makeup of that is, I think that's all fine. But let's see it as an opportunity to work together, at least on the one thing that we can come to agreement on right now, which is service. And then if operations comes up down the road as something that we can work together on, then there's some opportunity there. But I don't think that they should operate in a vacuum against each other, but I also don't think they should be subject to each other.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gregg?
Cade, just, you bring up some interesting points. Never did I ever care what Lander paid for their general aviation airport. Do you have that in the top of your head, what the city donates?
Gary does.
Pays into the... Do you have an idea of what your costs are to run the airport for Lander?
Mr. Chair, I don't. There's Gary Michaud at the City of Lander. Mr. Chair, I do not, because those costs differ every year depending on what work we're doing, but we do have a large general aviation airport. We have the largest, most successful general aviation airport in the state, and so we have a lot of money that we have to put towards that.
Are we talking hundreds of thousands, or give me a general idea? It's burned in my mind. We go 380 every year almost.
Well, and the reason I can't tell you that is it just depends on the work we're doing that year. If we're doing a big runway project, or if we're looking to relocate the rodeo grounds for expansion or anything like that, it depends. It can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, though. So.
And why I bring that up is because I've never been sympathetic there, and I want to be. I don't think there's anybody here that wants to split the baby, and I think we have to keep that side of the world turning, and we got to get air service into Riverton. I don't, we got to stop spatting over who's the chair and how many people are on it, and then we got to come down to reality. Can we really raise that much money on a long-term sustained basis out of the private sector? Because the cities are tapped. Because I think when you get that report back to me, you'll feel like you can't squeeze the orange anymore. Just like Mr. Weaver. He squeezes the orange as tight as he can to get what he can get done at the airport. And we appreciate that. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate the size of your airport, and I know the people that fly into it do too. And so I think what we need to do is come together, and we've spent a lot of time batting this around. Both my parents were born and raised in Lander. I love Lander. It's my vacation spot when I get to go on vacation.
It's everybody's vacation.
And so let's get past that. And I think the real reality is, can we even afford what we're talking about? Is it a Ford or is it a Mercedes? And we need to get that council gets together, finds out if there's any real reliable air service available. Anybody would love to come and help us. If there is, what do we got to do to guarantee it? Let's get past that, and let's get on the road to healing this. And because if we don't, the cancers we lose our cafeteria, we just keep losing, and pretty soon we're going to be sitting here with a really nice airport, fabulous fire truck that doesn't do anything. And if we don't get to that point, we can ban each other around all day long, and it really comes right back to the fact that another carrier is going to cost us some more money. So let's find out what the money differences are. If you can afford anything more, and Kate makes a good point. All the time we're sitting here thinking we're putting a lot of money in, and I never had a concern of what you're paying to keep your airport running. And so we need both of those. I'm not saying shut down one or move the airports to Hudson. That's my mother's solution. One airport in Hudson. She's a brilliant woman. And yet, it just comes right down to the fact that when we get that committee put together, it needs to make some reality decisions of what's available to us, how much it's going to cost us to get to that point, and do we want to, and we'll need to take that to the constituents to see if, and all the time I've been on the airport board, the real fact of the matter is that we keep trying to get people to use our airports, and the leakage is not because business will use it. Families, when you get 6 people on the plane, makes enough money to drive to Denver. And so we really got to make an understanding amongst ourselves that we have to go out and get that business dollar, and what's it going to cost inside Fremont County, those businesses to help us. And if we can't get enough businesses to help us, we're going to have to live with what we can afford as taxpayers. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chair, just to add on to that, Mayor Blakeman from Du Bois last week at FCAG had mentioned that they have $150,000 they have to come up with to help with an airport project, which is, for a small town like that, that is a tremendous amount of money. I think we've established this as a very, very urgent situation, and I would love to see it move forward. And I really do feel like we need to put our trust in the Aeronautics Division. They've been doing this for several years. They have a very successful model, and they have a lot of good things they can bring to the table and help us make the air service successful in Fremont County. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick comment. This meeting is going longer than I think any of us anticipated. But from my position as mayor and a member of FCAG, I feel that I need to be sensitive to our entire county, not just, and Mr. Mastis has made some very good points, in terms of the separation. I don't disagree with that. And that's my feeling, why we're forming the task force, to make that recommendation. And if that task force feels that they want to separate out and bring it and let's move forward. I have no problem with that. But to solve that problem here this morning, and each of us with our nuances of what we think should be or shouldn't be, I don't think is appropriate for us to try to resolve here. And that's the whole reason for putting together as broad a task force as possible. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think those are some of the notes that I was making as Councilman Guard was speaking, is that, I think that, Kate, you're a little, the cart's ahead of the horse just a little bit from where we are. And I think there's certainly some urgency to create the ad hoc group to move forward with the grant application and moving that. But I think a lot of where we were coming from in our discussions, just to enlighten everyone else, is that the task force, the creation of the task force, wasn't necessarily to take this ball and go running forward like, hey, let's go get SkyWest in here. But more so, or whomever, although the preference has been clear, I think the preference from the mayor's standpoint was more create the task force to determine, first off, we have to determine if the community will support it. And obviously there's some support. There's a lot of support, and this is a great thing. But the second part is it sustainable? We need to make sure that this community can sustain it. I would rather do that in a broader based task force instead of the Miracle 5 or whomever that move forward and push that as this is the solution. We're going to speak for everybody in the community and move this ball rolling. Meanwhile, they can sideline Great Lakes or whomever else. Really, Wyoming Aeronautics, what is the time to play? Are we talking 3 months, 6 months? If today we said, let's move forward, let's get another airline in here, how long are we talking realistically?
Realistically, I would say 3 to 6 months.
Okay. So we could, in the decisions we make here in the very near future, go the next 3 to 6 months without an airport. Right? I mean, without airline service. Very realistically. So are we as an organization, as a group, as a community, are we prepared to lose all air service for the next 3 to 6 months? Or longer? Maybe it's a little faster. But I think that needs to be one of the first questions we ask. Are we? Because I think Nick mentioned that, once you lose it, your chances of getting back are pretty low. So we need to move forward with the intent that we don't want to lose it. And I think we need to walk on eggshells around all the carriers until we make those determinations and we can move forward. So I think the point of the mayor's task force was to determine what those needs are, not necessarily take the football and start running towards that end game, but to determine what the needs are, get the community support, get the involvement from the rest of the communities, and make a recommendation back to this board as to how to move forward. We can't make the decision to separate service from the operations. That's a city council thing. And it's not the 5 ad hoc board or committee things decision either. It would be like me forming a committee to tell you what color to paint your new community center. Can't really do that. It's a city project. The people of Lander have that say. The council of Lander has that say. So until the city of Riverton kind of relinquishes that and we can make a good call to them and a good case to them to say, look, we want to pursue this other option, then it's a city council's decision. But it's not the ad hoc committee's decision. It has to be released from the city in our opinion.
So a couple of things. First of all, the ad hoc committee was actually kind of put together with the city on it, but there really doesn't need to be an ad hoc, because the purpose of the ad hoc was to pursue the idea of putting a grant together. We've had that discussion. Really, there can't be a grant put together until we know how we're going to proceed. If you take a look at the application, who your airline is, what their schedule is going to be, how many flights are they going to fly, what their revenue guarantee is.
Right.
So the willingness and ability of that ad hoc group to move to start negotiations in good faith to get those numbers from SkyWest has essentially been eliminated at today's meeting. So there doesn't need to be the Miracle 5, as you so derogatorily call them, in place. We'll let the committee go forward, the task force, and I think they can work with the committee or work with the community and kind of find out where that support is. I think it's great that all these smaller communities are participating. It would be great if we could get the tribes to join in because everyone's impacted. So I think there's some good opportunity to move forward with that. And the ad hoc that was put together last week really doesn't serve a purpose at this point because
there's not enough answered questions.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we even decide if we're going to
Can
get service.
we not move the ad hoc and combine it with I mean, really, we're 3 members short on the ad hoc.
It's being
from what the mayor has
that,
recommended.
Right, and that was Mayor Warpness's recommendation, and however you guys vote to proceed on that's great. I was just saying there's no reason for both committees to exist, and so I have no problem.
Well, I don't know necessarily that there were 2 committees. I think that was a committee that was put together ad hoc to get things moving based on the urgency that was presented with the intent, my understanding from the mayor, is that, and his letter this morning was to combine that, kind of make it, kind of add to that 5.
To possibly make the at-large members
To
the
make
ones
that
were,
a larger, to make that a larger group that would better represent the community at large. I don't think we've negated the work of the 5 that has already taken place. And I think that.
No, that wasn't my point at all. I was saying I agree with you that we can work under this one task force.
So I think the.
Maybe that point was missed. I actually agree with what you're saying, and we can work together as a group on that.
So I think the intent of the mayor was to have that committee come back to the city council or through the airport board to make that recommendation to city council to move that forward.
And I just had one question for aeronautics, just as far as timing, because you asked what the timing would be of a gap of getting. The one point that they did make this morning is that there's about $2 million roughly for the biennium. That includes, if 4 people divide that pot, it's 500,000. If 2 people, it's 1 million each. If whatever. Is there any risk of another community? Are there any other communities out there having conversations right now? On a very loose.
Good point.
In general, the answer is yes. There are other communities. Are there other communities that are going to apply imminently? I don't know the answer to that question. I think that Sheridan and Riverton are probably, this is my estimation, that you guys are further ahead in the process than other communities. But to answer your question, yes, they could.
So that would just be a consideration, a sensitivity, time sensitivity, that the money that we're.
Is there any dissension or any negative connotation to incorporating the 5 ad hoc members that are already part of the mayor's task force list that hasn't yet been approved? Is there any problem in the 5 that are already on that committee being a part of the larger group and essentially disbanding the 5 ad hoc that was already created?
Not for me.
Ms. Kessler?
Mr. Chairman, I don't care so much about the process to get there, but it's got to go fast. And that's what concerns me about layers and layers of task force to advise about this, to then advise to that. I think we heard, as was related in this meeting, when Senator Bebout was asked how soon to do this yesterday. We heard that from all of the state legislators in the meeting last week, which included Representative Miller, Senator Case, and Representative Larson. I am worried that we're going to lose our money from the state. I'm also worried that we're not looking like we're unified and ready in the image we're giving the state. I'm not interested in form just for form's sake. We need to actually get the job done. And so whatever it takes to expedite it, let's do it. I think it's critical. We're going to lose an opportunity. That was made clear to us last week. We've got to jump on this opportunity. And so it's fine with me to disband anybody, but let's get this task force meeting tomorrow as soon as we can, because we've got to have a shot at this or we're going to lose it.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kessler, that was the reason for the forming of that 5-member board. And it was my understanding that that was what you were working on at this time. Yeah. And so the work that you folks have done has not been wasted. That's been valuable information to get together that will just be merged into the next meeting of the task force.
But Mr. Mayor, my understanding, I think, was also that we were going to be able to start talking to the state and actually get this
It's my understanding that you have been talking to the state.
But
getting applications, I see some emails that is the case.
Right, but now it sounds like that's just been put on hold until we get the larger group together. I guess I guess I am confused about what the next step is then.
The next step is for the task force to call their next meeting, and if they want to call it after this get together, I have no problem with that.
I think you're right in you always have to have some form, even even when you expedite, and form doesn't necessarily have to take a long time either. But I think we have to maintain our integrity with the citizens of Riverton who have been burdening this or shouldering the burden of this all this time. I think it's important that because it is something that needs to go through the city council, that if you were to have a proposal or some idea together tomorrow or whenever that may be, I don't know that this is necessarily slowing that process down any differently than the 5-member ad hoc. I'm certain that that the city council would be willing to meet with any group at any time and expedite that, especially if the urgency is placed. As far as the unified front, I don't think the conversations we're having today are any different than any other community. I mean, you have to have these conversations in order to move things forward, and I appreciate everybody's time. We've been here for I don't know how long. But this is a really important thing. So if we're saying how important it is, let's not just go taking off in one direction without having that thought process and without having that input from the appropriate people. Yeah, we can get things moving. We can start shaking things and applying for grants and getting that moving, as the mayor just stated. But I think the bigger picture still needs, that form still needs to follow that function, at least in some semblance. And I don't know that this committee is necessarily who the task force needs to, or that this board is who the task force needs to report to. It really doesn't matter if they go right to the city council. We typically advise the city council, so we kind of articulate that to the council through the mayor and through the member that's the city council member that sits on this board. So whether that is a committee that reports to, or a task force that reports to this board or directly to the council, I mean, however we decide to do that, and that's up to the mayor and the council to advise us how to move forward. But it's important that we don't see this as obstructionism, it's discussion. And we have to have this discussion, and the five and the three of you guys have already spent a considerable amount of time working through this, and now it's a matter of bringing everybody up to speed. Because you guys have already been thinking about this. You're 2 weeks ahead. We still have to bring everybody else and ramp them up with those decisions and those ideas and that information. We scheduled this meeting with Wyoming Aeronautics and with Nick months ago. And it's not that we haven't started this process, it's just that you're way ahead. So don't see this as obstructionism. See it as trying to we have to ask these questions. We have to make sure that the community and the people that we report to and that the city council reports to, they have all the answers as well. So it's important that the media is here, and it's important that we air these questions and air these discussions. And Kate, I did not mean anything derogatory by that. We have to have that group had to be formed, and it formed kind of by miracle that we were all in the same room, and went forward as quickly as it did. And the mayor made those decisions to assign Stephen to that group, and there really hasn't been a lot that I've seen out of that group of five. I mean, there have been a few emails, but in all the urgency that we have, I kind of expected to see more flurry of content, which hasn't really existed. Maybe it has in the background, but hasn't really been distributed to other members. So with that said, I think, Ms. Olson, you had a question?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's time we've all aired our, concerns, hopes, desires. I think we need to move on and get going with this. We need to move on with getting the money. And I think we need to move on with the task force appointment. And Missy has something to say.
Yes, Missy.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, representing Lita as part of the ad hoc task force, one of the things we were looking at and Lita and IDEA had agreed upon since that meeting last week was that both groups agreed to be a sponsor to start the conversation with Wyoming Aeronautics, which would lead to conversations with alternate carriers, the required revenue guarantee fundings, availability from the state, municipalities, and private-public partnerships. So what I'm looking for specifically, since both of our entities agreed to co-sponsor that and we're ready to begin work on that immediately, should we not do that and wait for this broader task force to get its feet underneath them?
I think we need to move, but I think one of the points of having Wyoming Aeronautics here was to give us some direction, and I think we put it fairly black and white that we need to move, and that we will probably end up having to pay in order to have an airline, but I don't know that anybody's really prepared to lose what we have in the interim, so I think we need to make sure that we move forward to see if this is even something that, I think we have to move forward and get things going, obviously, but we also have to make certain that we do it in a methodical way, that we don't upset Great Lakes and everybody else, and then at the end determine, well, we just really don't have the support we thought we might have to fund this, and we end up with nothing. So I guess in moving forward, the plan needs to be, the goal is better air service.
Right. And to be clear, that the grant application process addresses all of the questions that you bring up in it, so that through the grant application, that is how we communicate with Wyoming Aeronautics Board. They have the conversations with multiple providers. There's certainly no limitation whatsoever that the current Riverton Airport Board could not continue your conversations with Great Lakes and encouraging them to provide better service in the meantime. But the questions that we are asking, the venue to answer those questions is through the grant application process and working with Wyoming Aeronautics Board. So that's what I'm asking is, can Lita and IDEA begin that conversation to gather the information about the cost, the revenue guarantees that would need to be provided by municipalities and public-private partnerships, and bring that back to whatever organization we need to reply to, or do we need to put hold on
And
that?
I think that process is already moving forward and should continue to move forward.
Well, that's what I'm asking is, can Lita and IDEA continue and complete the grant application with the Wyoming Aeronautics Board? Because that's the next step.
Dennis,
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, just so that we're all on the same page here, the application itself doesn't actually happen until you have somebody lined up ready to go. That doesn't prevent us from getting with the task force and having these conversations. We need to have these conversations, but the actual application doesn't happen until you know who it is, you know how much it is.
Right.
Then you submit that in a very detailed manner to us. We give that to the commission. From my perspective, though, what I need to know, or what Sherry needs to know, since Sherry is the one running the program and who you'll be contacting, she needs to know who's the contact. Who are we working with? Who's making the decisions on air service for the Riverton community? That's what we need to know. We don't necessarily care who it is. I say that in kind of a generic term, but we just need to know who it is so that we know who's giving kind of the direction from the community.
I think to answer that, the task force has been started. The task force is going to be formalized today. The task force has already been working with the 5-member ad hoc. This would augment that and keep moving forward. I think we've spent a lot of time discussing the particular antics involved in the task force, but realistically, I think we've already determined that it needs to move forward, that we haven't really stopped anything from moving forward. We've been expediting thus far. And I don't know that one of the things on our agenda is committee reports. I mean, I think that hearing from the task force in regular board meetings is certainly, and as necessary, is certainly a responsible thing to do, to keep that information in front of the media, in front of the public and constituents and so forth. So I don't know that we've hindered the process, and I kind of felt a sudden stoppage from the 3 of the 5 members in the group, but I don't think that's I don't think that's anything that we've said. And
I think what we need is some authorization.
Okay.
The task force has to be authorized verbally somehow by the folks who run the airport. I think all they're asking for is authorization. I'm Nancy Fairpan, I'm on city.
great. Councilman Gard, how should we proceed with providing that authorization?
Well, I think right now we're once again on that same horse we rode in on. The mayor's got the task force put together here. We need to vote on it and get it in place. They could meet this afternoon and set up a chairman, and then we got authorization. You got it back to the councils. We need to go through both councils. You guys can't embed in your council any more than your one vote, any more than I can. And so I think everybody's on tune, and we need to just get going and get, if it's 7, I'm counting here, it can be 5, it can be 6, it could be, you could stop it at 8. I just don't think it makes a lot of difference. I think we get it going. The problem is obvious.
So is this something that has to be taken care of in a city council meeting to authorize this?
I would say so.
Okay.
I would say that the authorization of the encumbrance of any funds or anything, if that's what you're asking.
Well, we're not asking for encumbering funds right now. All we're doing is getting a task force to explore the possibility and make application to the state. What I'm hearing from the Aeronautics Board is that they need to have somebody authorized to make that. We as city councils can authorize that. I think that's a city council thing, not so much as, if I'm understanding it correctly.
I think that's just a formality for our council
Right.
to go
Well,
through that. But yes,
and your
that's why
council.
we're here.
And our council, and you have been appointed by Mick to, but I think, but to authorize the task force to, I guess, the Riverton City Council has to authorize the task force because it's the Riverton Airport then.
That's correct.
So it doesn't need to go through us.
But then we still need to decide who's going to be the contact person for Wyoming Aeronautics.
The application happens through IDEA and LEDA.
Yeah.
Because it needs to be an application from a nonprofit organization. I don't know that there needs to be, we've already started the task force, Mr. Mayor, and we're not making any decisions to encumber public funds at this point. We're making a decision to move forward with the discussions of applying for the grant and seeing where this takes us.
However, the Aeronautics Board does need to have an authorized party, it sounds like to me.
Well, the authorized party is I think, is going to be IDEA and LEDA if they're working together. Are they not the contact then, at that point?
My guess is YDOT needs to hear that. Someone
Right.
from IDEA or LIDA will be your contact for this process.
Well, I can make that motion.
So, yeah,
I can make that motion on this panel, if that's what you're wanting, that the contact people need to work with our sponsoring, units, which is LIDA and IDEA Inc. I think we're all with that. There's not gonna be any money spent, and if that's what Wyoming Aeronautics needs to hear.
well,
you
Rich,
have a problem with that?
let me just say, we are at item 7, which is appointing the task force. It's a flexible tax. The task force, as I see this, can get appointed right now, and that task force can authorize LIDA and IDEA Inc. to, for the grant.
And I think that's a
That's where
good
we're going.
point, and it's in today's agenda, and it's ready to go, and we have set that task force. And
so let's-
it may be a little bit different than what it was this morning, but I don't think Kate or anybody in Lander Mines will work through it, and then I think even this afternoon or tomorrow, Monday, whenever that meeting can get back together, we need to communicate to the aeronautics that talk to this individual with what information we have. And then we are time sensitive. We are at that point. We need to be underfoot and going, and it needs to be, Mayor Wolf needs to know, Mayor Warpness needs to know. Those guys are ultimately on the line for what the impact is, and I don't think anybody here is designing a bomb to blow up anybody. When we get those put together back into the, now that's not saying that when the councils talk about it, there may be some nay voters. There may be somebody looking at that and saying, this is real expensive and I'm not touching this. And they got their one vote too, just like the rest of us.
But that comes later.
That does come
we
later,
need movement now.
we're time sensitive today. We need to take, just like, Bob says, we need to vote on the task force, get the task force to meet and get to Wyoming Aeronautics.
So I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman, thanking the county for their support for the airport, because you've been supporting the airport. And I'd like to make the motion that we appoint the task force, as the mayor outlined it.
The city council.
I'm sorry?
We don't have that authority. I'd recommend the city council that they appoint that task force.
Well, item 7 says there's a task force appointment on this agenda. Am I right?
Say that again?
The task force appointment is on this agenda.
That's correct.
And this
So
body
we need
can
to-
appoint
We need to
a
recommend
motion.
City council that that's what you're gonna do.
This
I
is
think technically, you're correct, Jim, that this airport board would make the recommendation to appoint
Okay,
this,
I get your point. Okay, so
to appoint this
modify
board to the council and then
my
at our
motion
next
and-
meeting.
and say, I make a motion that we, ask the city council to appoint the task force,
Right.
and,
Not confused, you don't understand the problem.
Since we're advisory, that's what we.
since
should
we're
do.
an advisory board,
Yeah.
okay.
I will second
Okay.
that, Bob. I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion, just to add complexity, but the motion on the table then is to recommend that the city council appoint the task force as outlined by the mayor, as presented. And if it would make the group feel better, if I abstain from that, as long as we have city representation through Paul and Stephen, I would remove myself from that task force in light of just keeping things moving forward. There's certainly a high degree of interest and knowledge that comes from this whole board and this whole body, but I think working through Paul Griffin, we can realize that same input, and we'll get regular input from you as well. So I would amend that I not be on that task force.
My name's on the task force too, so if that's gonna be the case, I'll opt out too, but
Well, I think having a city council member is probably appropriate since we have Lander city council member.
we need that, and I think we're just splitting hairs.
I just wanted to deload it from the Riverton
We just
side.
need to move forward and get this in the realm of work.
Councilman Guard,
Not on our board.
he is so.
Oh, he is?
Yes, he was appointed this morning.
Ellen was
Mary Ellen has resigned, and Mr. Guard has been appointed in her stead. So that would give us a airport board
discussion?
member.
Are we in discussion?
We are in discussion. That would give us an airport board member as well as a city council member, and then the airport director of operations on that board as well. So I don't want to overload the board, so, all right.
And in discussion, I just want to say to Cade, I feel like this task force, as large as it is a better vehicle for IDEA and LEAD to be the sponsors or the to seek the grant.
Yep.
And I appreciate your cooperation.
I would say too that the task force should grow and should shrink. I mean, as people come and go, I think people should be allowed to have some input, and if they bring energy and certainly funds, the more the merrier.
Okay.
But I do appreciate everybody's work, and I know our discussions have been long, but hopefully we can come united and move forward and as a unified body. And Mr. Allen, I hope that helps from your perspective as well.
Need to call a vote.
I will.
Call for the question.
I will. This is still part of my discussion.
Well, we're trying to cut.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Now, I do have one
Motion
question.
carries. Oh,
Did we, now are we also empowering IDEA and LEDA to go ahead with the grant process in this?
That's a
vote?
function of the task force.
That's their
force.
fault.
I don't think that's-
So they have the authority to go ahead and do that.
You can work with yourselves. All right.
All right.
All right. So, commercial employment and traffic reports.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be real brief on this.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Our numbers for February, like I said, we have last month 45% leakage, canceled flights. We're up about 60% this month. Out of the flights that did get here, the ones that were more than 6 minutes late, we're still about 53% of those. You know, they have Great Lakes, their issues with.
How many were canceled, Paul?
They had 94 departures, and we had 50 of them land. Arrivals 89, and only 49 of them land. And then our boardings are down roughly about 470 from this time last year.
Thank you.
Paul, let me ask you a question. You say how many emplaned versus how
Yeah.
many deplaned?
The percentage, year to date, we had 1,258 to our previous of 1,727.
No, but what I wanna know is, if you have, you're losing 50% on people that come in here deplaned. You ought to have the same number of flights in-plane leaving.
Yeah, our numbers are showing different departures, arrivals. Some of the, I believe it's probably, Great Lakes is not here now, but it's probably due to some of the night flights not getting here, then the morning flights not going out. Sometimes they will bring a flight in to catch up with two flights that are still sitting here. The numbers aren't really jiving.
Okay.
And then our GA side, we're showing about half of our in-transit. People come just through for gas and visiting or whatever. It's not our base aircraft. They're down about half this month also, and a lot of it's probably fuel prices. And it's affecting not just Riverton, but everybody.
It's been winter too.
Yes.
The skies have been quiet.
Yep.
Yep. Well, I'd like to thank Wyoming Aeronautics and Nick Wingler for coming up and making the presentation. Hopefully, you probably see this all the time, and I really appreciate the input and the phone calls and information you've provided as well. I think it's really important that everything be done as above board and out in the open as possible. Even though sometimes the making of the sausage is ugly, at least we have these conversations, and it kind of brings everybody up to speed. So I do appreciate you guys being here and sitting through that process.
Question. Did we give the task force the authority to have them start conversation with SkyWest or do you need that from us?
It's just an application of the grant process.
I'm not talking about that application, I'm just talking about preliminary discussions with SkyWest. Get all the information that the task force is gonna need, or the ad hoc committee, whatever. We need to start some conversations with SkyWest right now. That's personal opinion.
I think just to get to the point, we can speak to SkyWest right now, but what we really need to do is sit down and talk to the task force and see what other ideas they want to pursue based on Councilman Guard's conversation earlier today. We have the authority we need, but now that we know who to talk to, we will be in contact with them to make. We're good to go from our side, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, just keep us informed.
That will be part of the task force responsibility.
Mr. Chairman, just a question for you. Is there really any other options than SkyWest out there in all reality?
Slight. I think your best bet today, and again, this industry changes so quickly that can change tomorrow. But today, I think the answer is SkyWest. But I think we need to do due diligence and ask some questions as Councilman Guard has recommended. So we can certainly do that.
So Dennis, what type of reliability have you seen from SkyWest, and how has the pilot issues affected them? Because what you read is it's pretty much across the board. How have they positioned themselves to be more resilient?
I'm going to pass that on.
Mr. Chairman, we actually put together some numbers, and that was looking at their reliability in Rock Springs and Gillette over the last year. And those numbers were still in the high 90s for on time and also reliability. As far as their numbers recently from this year, that's not information I have.
That would be relevant to these discussions we're having, because if they're Great Lakes didn't really start experiencing these problems until November as well. So looking at SkyWest numbers from the last 3 months, 4 months would have relevancy as well.
The numbers I'm speaking of were for 2013, so that included November and December. As far as January and February, perhaps you had any discussions with them?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, to answer your question as pointed as we can, as far as SkyWest is concerned, they are not our only partner in the state. And I want to be very clear on that. They are a partner that helps facilitate needs to United Airlines service to Denver and Delta Airlines service to Salt Lake, but they are not our only partner. Where we're happy with them is their reliability and on-time performance has been stellar. Has been really good. We were at a meeting last month where the airport manager in Laramie came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm really happy. I got a call from SkyWest apologizing for their poor operation because they canceled 2 flights this week." That's not typical of what we see of them. Their operation we've been very pleased with and have not heard bad feedback from our communities in anything different.
How about their pricing? Has it crawled up as they eliminate the other carrier?
No, it hasn't. The way I could go for another hour, but really no. I mean, it hasn't. We've been happy with what we've seen. We've been happy with the pricing to Denver, the pricing to Salt Lake and beyond.
Thank you.
One other question that's pertinent that I was asked was, you as a consultant, Nick, is there a reason for Riverton to move forward with a consultant to advise us as this process moves forward? I know I'm kind of asking you if we need your services.
Well, no, that's up to you guys. That's up to Dennis's point. SkyWest may be your best choice. Certainly in light of the fact that the airport runway is going to present some challenges. The fact of the matter is, not a lot of guys left.
One of the other side questions I have to ask is, Great Lakes is a Wyoming company, And it seems like from within Wyoming and Wyoming Aeronautics and Wyoming Department of Transportation and in aviation in general, there's a lot of non-support for Great Lakes. And I'm curious as to if that support will return from a Department of Transportation or from a Wyoming standpoint to support a Wyoming company, because it seems somewhat offsides that we're spending a lot of time talking about bringing in an outside airline when we have an airline that is based or housed in our state, and we're not supporting them as perhaps as fully as we should. And I say that from Wyoming, from a lot of Wyoming viewpoints.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure why you feel we haven't supported them.
Well, I was saying I'm not getting a lot of warm and fuzzy. Pretty much everything has been steered towards replacing Great Lakes and finding alternatives to Great Lakes, as opposed to, and not necessarily just in this conversation today.
Let me clarify.
I just mean in general.
Let me clarify, Mr. Chairman. We don't favor any airline, and we don't look down on any airline. So with the information you saw in Nick's presentation today was simply the truth, and that's all we can show is the truth. Are we here to help Great Lakes? Absolutely. Have we had conversations with Great Lakes? Absolutely. We don't make decisions for them. So from my perspective, Mr. Chairman, we are fully behind Great Lakes. The question is, can Great Lakes perform the way a community needs them to? You have to answer that question for yourself. I can't do that. And no way am I going to choose one airline over another. We simply state the facts, and you've seen the facts clearly today. So, Mr. Chairman, we certainly support Wyoming communities or Wyoming businesses. We support Great Lakes, but we don't operate their aircraft for them.
For a point of clarification, I wasn't trying to insinuate that Wyoming Aeronautics or yourself supported one airline over another. I was speaking more in a broad term that as a Wyoming company, we as a community, we as a state, it doesn't seem like we support a Wyoming company as much as we can. It just doesn't give that appearance. And I understand your delineation between we don't make that choice, and perhaps you were probably not the best person to put on the spot with that question. I apologize for that. But it does make some sense that you have a Wyoming company who's trying to do what they can to stay afloat in this industry and be profitable, and they have been profitable. So when you look at them and you say, well, gee, it's not really they're losing money per se, other than they're killing flights all over the place. They're cutting off their own tentacles to support more of a core. Could that not be a benefit to Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, you're speaking very generically here. Is there a specific question that you want to ask? Is
I
there
suppose
something
not.
that you're not?
Well, I guess I wanted the reassurance that the Wyoming Aeronautics Association would entertain any airline, including
Absolutely.
Great Lakes,
Absolutely.
and not just specifically someone else.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, anything from anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I got
Sir?
one other thing, starting April 1st, Great Lakes has a new schedule out. I think should be included in your packet. If not, I got a copy here. What they're doing is, come April 1st, they're taking one of our flights away, and then they're giving us all Brazilias. They're taking those 1900s. If you haven't heard, they're taking the 1900s primarily, and they're starting to make them from a 19-seat to a 9-seater, put them in their smaller markets. It gives them a training ground to build up their pilots with lower hours, and then that'll free up some of their pilots to fly these Brazilias.
But they're still keeping the 19-seat 1900s also, right?
That I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I just know that they're replacing our market April 1st with 100% Brazilias.
Yeah. It was my understanding they're still keeping some of their aircraft 19 seats.
Your Chairman,
Yes.
isn't that good news for us? 30-seaters, or are
Yes
you
and no,
pointing at the
there's
runway
not many
replacement?
Brazilias out there, and just from our standpoint up at the airport, kind of watching, when we see the Brasilia coming, there's a higher likelihood that it's probably going to have a mechanical
problem.
And they're not going to be able to fly the Brazilias once we go to work on the
No,
runway.
they're in the same boat as whether or not we have Great Lakes or a different air carrier. Come summer 2015, we're tearing up half of a runway, and the 1900 can't even land on there, but they can land on the crosswind.
That's my question.
But the Brasilia or anybody higher the weight restriction prohibits them, the category, it's a different category runway.
Did I hear you say that the Brasilia can or cannot land?
Brasilia cannot land on our crosswind, no matter if it's Great Lakes or SkyWest.
Thank you.
I heard him say differently. That we could bring that barrier in on that.
He was talking about Cheryl being with YDOT, and I think she was under the influence that, or the perception that we have a crosswind runway too, but it's 4,800 foot long and it's a category B, which is a lower aircraft landing weight. So the 1900 can land on there, but even today the Brasilias cannot land on there. And that's why one of the gals that got up and spoke said they made it all the way here, turned around, went back. A lot of times it's wind, weather, mechanical.
Runway.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
I think you had a question.
Oh, talk to me about the restaurant.
Mr. Chairman,
Where we stand.
the city has received a letter, I believe it was March 17th. She's no longer in business at the cafe. We're working up a new, a lease agreement and then we're putting a notice out in the paper for, proposals. Once we get those proposals, I believe April 4th is the deadline for those proposals.
Okay.
And out of those proposals, we'll pick a new cafe operator and sign a new lease with them.
So is that closed right now?
It is closed right now.
And will be till April?
Till sometime after, we gotta go in there and make a few, maintenance repairs and stuff while it's closed now.
Yeah.
And depending how many people, put their name in the hat to try and, start business up there.
Okay. I was just curious.
All right.
Thank you.
Is there any further business? Being none? Sorry?
I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second. You don't need one, but that'll work.